podcasts. Why did it have to be podcasts?
Great.
I don't think I nailed it. Sometimes I'm able to pull a surprising Harrison out of my pocket.
Needs to be growlier, even at that age.
Snakes. Podcast. Fuck. It is tough now. I think I'm better at doing older Harrison.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's tough when he's
young.
Thunderbolt
Ross seeing a snake.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
You know, my joke is that he's going to turn into Red Hulk when they're like, we have to make the military more woke. He'll be like, "Rawr!" Right? That'll be what it is. I don't even know. Is Thunderbolt Ross right wing? He is, right?
Well, look, we have a guest who can answer.
I want our guest to answer
Not
this.
To put him on the spot.
Is Thunderbolt Ross a Republican?
You know, I love this podcast so much. And I immediately went to, I wonder what thing we're going to talk about that I couldn't predict. And right away. It's Thunderbolt Ross right wing.
Have you ever written for the big man? Have you ever written Thunderbolt Ross, the best character in the Marvel universe?
I have.
Oh, sure.
I did a believe it or not, a weird little mini arc in Avengers with the great Walt Simonson.
Yes.
And with Red Hulk front and center.
Yeah,
I had this like I wanted.
He like joins
Walt Simonson
for a minute, right? He's in the Avengers as Red Hulk, right? I forget.
Something was going on. But so yes, but no, I did not in my heart lock down the politics of the time. It just had him in mission. So I can't speak to the
Does the Marvel universe have Democrats and Republicans? Like, does that come up, or is it sort of like we don't?
Well, kind of, but like mostly from a different universe than the one we live in now. So it's not even I don't even know if people would like refer to that in that way. You know what I mean?
That's why I'm so excited to see a Captain America movie that's about the president.
If you see it as an Air Force One sequel, I think it is deeply exciting and a huge swing, and I appreciate that kind of thing.
And let's say just incredible weave on Thunderbolt Ross's ideology.
Yeah. Well, we don't really know.
We don't know.
We were very, very focused on where the mustache went when he turned into the Hulk. So that was a much bigger issue for us as a group.
Where does it go?
I'll say this. I guess Brave New World's what it's called now?
Yeah.
Is coming out right around the time of this episode, maybe a little bit after.
That's right. It's coming out in February, right?
I was, not to be like a pedantic nerd, I was very thrilled in the trailer where there's a line where Harrison Ford's like, they told me if I wanted to be president, I had to lose the mustache.
Oh, interesting. Right. We haven't had a mustachioed president since maybe Roosevelt.
But that sort of solves the Red Hulk mustache issue, where they're just like, well, he just shaved before he ever became the Red Hulk.
Right.
I'm not joking. It was a large conversation in the Marvel retreats. Where does the mustache go?
Where did you land on the logic?
I just went, listen, not every fight's my fight, and I moved on with my life. Like there's a lot going on.
This is not for me to solve. Yeah.
I'm trying to get Miles Morales into the 616. It's I've got my lane. I've got issues that I was dealing with at the time.
Red Hulk has a gun, right? That was part of his thing. That it was like, it's like, you know, the Hulk. And I'm like, yeah, I know the Hulk. He's incredibly strong. And they're like, yeah, but he also has a big gun that he shoots someone with.
But there are other Hulks that had guns.
I guess in the 90s.
Mr. Fix-It would carry around a Tommy gun.
In the 90s, it got cool for Hulk to have a gun.
See, when I saw the trailer, I was much more, I've as we are going to discuss, I have lived with the Harrison Ford's energy as an actor my whole life, which has varied from the most excitable, most movie star to his middle ages, which were and that went on for a very long time.
Yes.
And then we've entered the this era, which started around Force Awakens, where he's just enjoying being Harrison Ford.
All right.
And Han Solo. And I never saw this coming. I thought we were going to be stuck with cranky Harrison Ford for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. When does cranky Ford begin, where it becomes like, do you even want to be here, like Harrison?
I would say it starts with Hollywood Homicide.
I think Hollywood Homicide is a reflection of what was going on at the time.
Yes, but I think that's sort of the fulcrum point.
Well, I'm going to argue that in the 90s, you know, when he's Jack Ryan and Richard Kimball, he's gruff, but he's not totally grumpy all the way up to Air Force One.
Right, that's honed movie star persona.
Gruff,
shit.
not grumpy. And then post Air Force One, you have 6 Days, 7 Nights, Random Hearts, K-19, What Lies Beneath, Hollywood Homicide. We're getting quite grumpy there.
Yeah, but here's okay. I mean, look, this is what we're here to do on this episode. To some degree,
Thematically,
right?
he makes sense as a grump in what.
Let me introduce the podcast because I want to get into this very deeply. This is a very interesting conversation.
Go ahead.
In an episode about one of
a very famous movie,
but also like one of the most definitive movie star performances of all time.
No question.
Right? Like this is obviously, inarguably, one of the totemic creations of the American cinema. Indiana Jones will always be on like the Mount Rushmore to a certain extent, the tapestry of like, what is this popular commercial art? But this one in particular, for a guy who had already created an insanely iconic character.
Yes.
In a wild blockbuster franchise.
And had been in 2 of them already. Right? Yep.
I feel like this is one of those performances, kind of like Bruce Willis in Die Hard, like John Wayne in Stagecoach, right? Where people just study it and go like, what did they fucking synthesize here?
Total natural ease, humor, sexiness, doesn't gives a shit, but doesn't seem like he's trying hard. Like you can't fake it.
Right.
Can't fake what he's doing.
Yes.
Just looking at pictures of him.
Just like we can't fake the fact that this is Blank Check with Griffin and David. I'm Griffin.
I mean, I suppose we could fake it. I'm David.
I know.
Could AI me?
Refused.
Just like some AI that goes, "What do you want from me?" every 2 minutes.
Cranky David face.
Right?
David's entering his early 2000s.
What if I become the Red David in 2025?
We might need that.
You think so? You think I need to Hulk out?
Maybe that's a year 15 arc.
Have they done any other color Hulks since Red?
Well, there's Composite Hulk, right?
All of them.
Have they really?
Yeah, they've done a lot of Hulk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there like a purple Hulk?
And the Red Hulk famously debuted on the TV show. Like that was they even referenced it in Walk Hard.
My daughter recently was watching an episode of Spidey and His Friends, or whatever the cartoon is, where there's small Spideys that Hulk was in. And Hulk's just walking through the carnival with Spider-Man, by the way. And I was kind of like, this is not what Hulk's supposed to be like. He's just a green man. But apart from that, the same as anything, right? And she just looked at him and she was like, he doesn't have any clothes on. And I was like, you're not wrong. That's the only takeaway she could have from this child Hulk. Because he didn't seem angry.
Right.
So he was just a man with no clothes on.
Bigger than the other kids?
Yeah, he's like...
But he's not like huge. He's like a big
taller. He's large. He's muscle bound. I don't know. The whole thing's weird. Some of these guys don't translate well as kid form. Like Spider-Man does.
Does she like Miles Morales?
Yeah, she likes all 3 of them.
He's right there in the front.
I'm just saying.
I know the creator of... Please introduce our guest.
It's Blank Check with Griffin and David. I'm Griffin. I'm David. It's a podcast about filmographies. Directors who have massive success early on in their careers, such as making Jaws.
Sure.
And are given a series of blank checks to make whatever crazy passion projects they want. And sometimes those checks clear, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, in the wake of a bounce, like 1941.
That's absolutely
This is another thing to talk about here. This is like one of the greatest comeback movies in Hollywood history.
Instant comeback, and probably one that doesn't... It's not like he was like, 1941 doesn't work. I guess I'll do my sort of throwback Alan Quarterman thing, and everyone was like, oh, sure, retreat to safe ground with that, Steve. Like, it's risky.
It's risky, and this is also a movie that is imbued with the energy of, I need to not fuck up.
Yeah.
Like, you feel a certain, in a weird way, it's only positive, but Spielberg being in his head about, like, I need to get over the hump of being a wonderkind and not be a flash in the pan.
Yeah, this poster.
David's pulling up a really weird poster. Can you turn this around to show?
A British poster. I mean, Ford just looks like 85 in this poster. Look at him. I don't know. Anyway.
Our guest today,
yes,
as David was saying right before we recorded, arguably the most important, impactful comic book writer of our generation, of our lifetime. You were very much the guy that I feel like we grew up on and grew up with and activated through. Brian Michael Bendis, unbelievably, is on the show.
Well, that's awfully nice. Thank you for having me. I am thrilled to be here. I am a huge fan of this podcast, as I will reveal over time, including knowing that I could jump in early and without being introduced.
It's a pro move.
It was my obligation. But I'm thrilled to be here. And I will say, for the few people I know, you like to keep it on the down low, what you're doing. But when I said I was doing the show, and they go, hey, what movie? And I said, Raiders. The reverence in which I was shown, like, they gave you Raiders. It was like literally an honor amongst us blankies. I'm on the Patreon. I am a huge fan.
So
You're on
thank
the
you for
page, so
having
you've
me.
listened to us blather on about Marvel movies?
yeah, but also think about this.
It's the funniest thing because, like, I've listened to you blabber on about The Mummy. I've listened to you blabber on about Austin Powers. I've listened to you. It is a very, very excellent space for my head to be in when I'm doing laundry and other things, like driving my kids around like an Uber. But I will say it is very funny that the part of the magic of this podcast is that often you will venture into other subjects
Right.
with no warning.
It's true.
And when I'm listening to a Marvel podcast, I'm like, hey, you might bring up some Secret Invasion stuff.
Sure.
It might come up. But it's always amazing when, like, you're talking about, like, Austin Powers, Man of Mystery, and all of a sudden you get into a Dark Avengers rant. And I'm like, oh, that's hilarious. I would never have guessed that.
A tremendous amount of your work looms very large in both of our minds.
Absolutely.
I feel like to some degree, like one of the connection points we found early on when we became friends
was Bendis Comics.
Yeah, I think like in our
Early
early
2000s,
sort of
yeah,
like courtship,
definitely.
but then also like finding like we have the same like, oh, these arcs were
Yeah.
as big for you as they were for
I
me.
just had
Yeah.
to move my bookshelf from one side of the room to the other. I had to take all the comic trade paperbacks off, put them all back on. I put faithfully had my Bendis shelf, all the Daredevils, all the Avengers, all the all the Jessica Jones. Anyway, Ultimate Spider-Man. I have all of your Ultimate Spider-Mans.
Thank you, man. That
I
means
know,
a
you
lot.
don't want
It's
to
really
hear it.
cool.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
what do you? Who wants?
Okay, fine. Well, you should hear it then. I have them all. I have like 16 of those things. They're heavy.
See, I believe I have every single issue of the original run, but that was
Of Ultimate
transferred
Spider-Man?
to
Uh-huh.
a basement that my father oversees that I am very concerned about the status of.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's tough.
Right. So I've almost been too scared to check. But at one point for a very long time, I had all of them as single issues, buying in real time.
What if I came, like, just brought you on to drag you about killing some character? I know I'm trying to think of what character I'd be mad about.
I would be very happy to have that conversation with you. But I will say, to pivot into our subject of the day, is that I don't think there's any movie that I could refer to as more important to the DNA of how old I was when it came out and what the world was like and what the culture was like and how, like, everything about my life at this stage that wasn't Marvel was Lucas and Spielberg. And I was giving like a great amount of thought in some of the links I sent you, Griffin, about like why do I know all of this? Like, why do I know all of this by heart? I knew every single magic trick that Lucas and Spielberg did from Star Wars through Temple of Doom. And it really was this amazing time where these two wonderkins were like doing magic tricks and then couldn't wait to show us how they did the magic trick. Like,
That's
here's
a
how
really
the
good
land
point.
speeder works.
Yeah.
And I'm 10 to 15 years old and I'm being showed the magic trick and then being showed how it's done. And mind blown constantly. Like, there's no other space I'm in with Star Wars and Indiana Jones. And it just keeps building. Star Wars comes out in 1977. I'm 10 years old. I see it in the theater. One of my favorite things you guys talk about is how old you are when you see certain things and the experience of what that was. And here I am right at this, like, I see Star Wars in theaters, and also Star Wars stays in theaters for 2.5 years.
Right. So you see it multiple times.
It's just a thing you can do constantly the entire time, my entire childhood, and see Star Wars up until Empire Strikes Back comes out. One of my favorite moments as a movie theater going child was my mom took me to see Empire Strikes Back. This is giant cliffhanger. I never experienced a cliffhanger outside of a comic book. With a comic book, it's always coming next month. Spider-Man's going to die. We'll figure out how in a month from now. You'll find out he's not dead. This one, I just sat there in stunned silence, and my mom just let me watch it again. We just never left the theater. We just like,
she's like, they'll roll it again. Well, if nothing else, you can see that again.
40 minutes later, they're going to show it.
You're not going to get the resolution you want, but at least you can just watch the same movie a second time immediately.
That's
like methadone.
That's an experience I didn't have, right? I didn't get to watch Empire Strikes Back and then have to wait 3 years for Return of the Jedi. Do you remember being happy with Empire Strikes Back? Like, forgetting the cliffhanger, just generally, were you satisfied? Or were you like, I don't know what to make of that?
Yes. Also, they're very aware. Oh, they're not repeating it. They're continuing it. It's a snow planet. And everything that we celebrate about it. The initial feeling was complete celebration. Like it's everything better. It's everything elevated and
They're doing
evolved
it.
and
It's
yeah.
broadening out. Yeah.
The only thing we didn't have is like, and I have a lot of kids, so I get to funnel my pop culture memories through how they're processing their pop culture memories right now. Like my son knows when the next 4 Marvel movies are coming out. We have no idea when and if another Star Wars was coming out, unless maybe you had a subscription to Starlog, maybe you caught something on some weird Entertainment Tonight thing. But other than that, unless you caught it live, unless you caught it in the moment, you really didn't know what's going to happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about my little cousin George a lot, who's now someone I'm like giving your trades to as he's like digging deeper and deeper into Marvel. But he is very much a kid who's like aware of what the upcoming Marvel slate is.
Right. It's weird.
You know, and he's like talking about the moves of like, so what does it mean that Downey Jr. is coming back, but he's a different character? Like he's like fully in on that. I mean, I've said this. It's just the quote that is the most fascinating to me was he was like, what Marvel movies are still coming out? This was whatever, a year or two ago. He always has to be like, so what are the next 3 Marvel movies? And he was like, what's coming out? And I was like, well, the Marvels comes out in 3 months. And he goes, I hear the buzz isn't good in that. And I'm like, you're 8.
Who's giving you the buzz?
You don't have a cell phone. You're not on social media. What is this? But like, he's very tapped into all this stuff in a way that's just like, this is the monoculture. Like the monoculture is, in a weird way, the discussion of the industry and all of that. Whereas I think, David and I always felt like weird kids where we were paying attention to this at a time when like people were not.
Yeah.
Where most adults were not.
Or you would have one friend.
Yes.
I had one friend who I shared like the comics thing with, or maybe two, like where that was it. And then maybe you like read Wizard magazine. And
yeah.
So then you know a little bit about like what's in the future. But yeah, you do not watch entire like presentations of slates on YouTube at press conferences and things
also,
like that.
The entire cottage industry of trying to guess what will happen next. Like you talking about that experience of like Spielberg and Lucas being so pioneering and kind of serializing legitimate A-level filmmaking, right? That they were sort of like bridging this gap between like the old serials that they grew up with and the comics that they grew up with and the TV shows and the radios plays and all of that were always seen as low art, or children's art or like pop trash or whatever it was. And then elevating this to like A-level craft, but getting people roped into the story in that way. Listen, I'm forgetting what the original connection point was, but if it was you messaging me or someone telling me, do you know that Brian Michael Bendis is a listener? At some point, it got relayed to me. And then we started messaging. And then you did the George Lucas talk show, I guess about a year ago, maybe?
Yeah, 8 months. I loved it. I absolutely adored that experience.
You were wonderful on the show. But we had already been messaging back and forth a little bit at that point of like, we got to find something for you to be on for. And we will keep potential guests in the hopper for a long time sometimes, to wait to find the right fit. And there were a couple things we were throwing out and going back and forth on. Then you come to George Lucas talk show and you came with like 10 Indiana Jones prop replicas. I don't think I've told you this.
No.
But Brian comes with like a hat, but he comes with like a Grail diary replica. He comes with like maps. Like he comes with like all the paperwork. And like you really look right there.
Hey, there you go.
And a little Jewish boy with a cup of Christ.
There a little chalice there.
It is this thing that's very nice about doing the show is that sometimes we will have people like yourself where George Lucas was so important to them in their development as an artist or whatever. And they basically use Connor as like a surrogate to say those things to.
Right.
You were very earnestly talking through the value of what this stuff means to you to Connor, who is very good at receiving that stuff.
Because he can go kind of like,
yeah. Well, of course, it's a perfect movie or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. And I like that lodged in my brain. And then a couple months after that, we were like, let's do it. Let's fucking do early Spielberg.
Let's do Spielberg.
And I feel like you were the first message I sent of just like Raiders.
That's awesome. Well, actually, you said, "Hey, we're doing early Spielberg," which I could have done any of them, and I think I said to you Temple of Doom, because I will describe to you. I'm now in high school, learning story, and Temple of Doom is playing at my local theater across the street from my house the entire summer. Like I saw it every day. Like I went to it every day. So it was like, even though Raiders is obviously the better film, the Temple of Doom, things were unlocking.
It met you at a pivotal moment in your life.
Yes.
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 Yeah.
And even this is darker, this is different. Why am I feeling differently about this? Like every choice that's being made was interesting to me. So, and then you literally said no Raiders, and I was like, oh, of course I will accept Raiders, but
I was like, it would be a mitzvah to us if you came on and did this one. And that gives you an opportunity to talk about Indiana Jones as a whole, and Lucas and Spielberg and all of this. It feels like you saying that, like, it's a big deal that we let you do this one. I was like, that will make our lives easier if we have Brian talk about Raiders and like kick off this Indiana Jones run. I think it's one of the things that David and I talk about a lot with your work, and how important it was for us at a sort of developmental age, like what you're talking about, of like learning how story works through the stuff you're absorbing and seeing what works and what doesn't, is that, like, I feel like we will often cite you as someone who is incredibly good at understanding the format in which you are doing the storytelling, in the sense that you are telling long form serialized stories. But there was a thing, I think a trend that started to bum me out, and I feel like we've complained about, David, that started in the 2000s, that has only gotten more and more extreme over time, where I would be reading single issues and feel like this is just a graphic novel that is being split up into 6 parts, that I'm just now having to wait a month to read chapters. Very similar, a lot of our complaints about streaming television now, where people are like, well, this is really just a 12-hour movie. And that balance of like doing something that has integrity as the one piece you're engaging with at that moment, but can also amount to something larger. You write great arcs, but I also think you understand the value of like, this issue needs to be satisfying. There's like a big picture and a small picture of what's going on there. And like Indiana Jones is this, basically it feels like storytelling experiment for Lucas and Spielberg to be like, can we make a movie that is just that, right? There are all these famous lines of, what if it was just the good parts and none of the boring parts? What if it was a Republic serial that never ended? At every 10 minutes, there's like another huge moment, another big cliffhanger, and where does it go from here? And then, yeah, I guess leaving you probably with the same feeling as Star Wars of like, so what happens to Indiana Jones now?
So a few things are going on here. Number one, that both Lucas and Spielberg are eager to let us in on the magic trick, and to take us in. And as a youngin', I'm all in. And so when I sent you that network special on Raiders Lost Ark that aired on like CBS, or as a document, right? But if you've can only see the movie in theaters, there's no other way to experience it. And all of a sudden they're showing you an hour long behind the scenes with genuine, interesting, and also honest storytelling. There's one bit in that special I sent you where Spielberg literally is exhausted in Morocco, going, I'm in the middle of the desert with all my friends. I'm completely embarrassing myself. This is not working. Like, he's having complete imposter syndrome. And I was thinking how I wonder if this would air today. Like, I wonder if like the director of Wicked was staring at endless, like having just a moment like we all have, going, so this honesty that they're sharing with us, and on top of, all right, so Lucas did Star Wars. Spielberg did the same thing with Close Encounters and Jaws. All right, so now, and also we have the John Williams documentary, which is out right now on Disney Plus, which really does a good job illustrating this. Is that in lieu of DVD and VHS, we have the soundtrack to just sit in our room, stare at the ceiling, and relive the movie in our mind's eye with whatever top, trading cards we have. Like, we're absorbing it and remembering it and recontextualizing it in ways that are just different than what happens today. No better or worse.
You had like novelizations, I guess, or
that's
comic
another
book
form
adaptations, right? Like, that's about as close as it got, I guess. Right.
But
well, that was a big one too, because even the Close Encounters of novelization written by Steven Spielberg, whether it is or isn't, but it says written by Steven Spielberg, it internalizes the story for a young person who's only seeing externalizing it. And I feel like I know what Roy Neary, like I know
You're
how
hearing
he's
his
thinking.
internal monologue. Yes.
Yeah, so that's for a young creator. All this is new. So all this is happening, including whatever 1941 what but all of it is very also connected loudly to the comic book space. Star Wars and Indiana Jones are also comic books, and the Star Wars series is drawn by Howard Chaykin to start with, which is one of the greats of all time. You had Walt Simonson doing the Close Encounters adaptation, and it is wonderful. It is not just
I've never read that.
well, they're very much like the short version of a story, like the Cliff Notes version of it, but visually spectacular. And there's a great like how they made it of the Close Encounters comic book that showed the differences of how something's directed versus how something is shown on the page. First time I'd ever seen that talked about anywhere. So this is a huge moment for a young comic book creator, right? So all I have is How to Make Comics the Marvel Way by Stan Lee, and everything George Lucas and Steven Spielberg are telling us. And Spielberg is loud on graphic novels for Close Encounters, makes a huge like National Lampoon's heavy metal version of 1941 that is loud and naughty and completely inappropriate by today's standards. And then the Raiders of the Lost Ark is a 2-issue miniseries, Cliff Notes by the amazing Klaus Janson. So these are all like world-class comic creators that are stopping what they're doing to adapt or to take what might have been a weekend gig for them, adapting these movies. But I remember the Raiders of the Lost Ark 2-issue Cliff Notes came out, and I was livid. This is not enough of an adaptation. Yeah. They skipped the Well of the Souls. There's just like major pieces missing because they just don't have the thing.
I'm looking at it though. It's Harold Chaykin. Yeah, like you said, he's the coolest. Damn.
Yeah,
it looks pretty good.
Yeah,
like,
the art also looks
fucking cool.
Look at Blade Runner comic adaptation by Al Williamson. You're about to be leveled. Like these things
because I was too old for this stuff, right? Yeah. Like by the time I was watching these movies, like you could, rent them or I could just watch the
versions of the moment you're talking about.
This looks cool
in the John Williams doc. Hit me really hard and kind of unlocked a thing that I don't think I'd ever like verbalized in such a specific way. And some of the talking heads say, to your point of like the movie's out of theaters at some point, you have the soundtrack, you look at the liner notes, you play it in your head. And I feel like so much of my childhood, I would listen to CDs of film scores and try to reconstruct the sequences in my mind. Literally listen to the beats and go, too. Oh, that's where that edit happens. Is. Right? That's when that moment happens.
This little swell here is
right.
That.
If you have the same kind of demented brain that the three of us clearly have, you're trying to like deconstruct these things to understand how they were made.
But you're also trying to remember the sort of pure emotion you felt the first time that
relive some form of it. Happened. Yeah. But this notion I don't think I've really thought about before of like Lucas and Spielberg kind of being the first major open source filmmakers that like I was rewatching recently, a thing I watch multiple times a year, but that like Peter Bogdanovich attempting to interview John Ford and John Ford just giving him like the steeliest non-answers of all time to everything.
Okay.
And that whole generation of movie directors, movie makers.
Like, I don't know.
Who either were just like very sort of like aloof and Tony and their sort of attitude about everything, or would try to just be like, I don't know, I just shoot movies. They're trash, whatever. Like try to sort of hide their emotions. Lucas and Spielberg were kind of the first enthusiasts who reached that level of success and wanted to, like, as you're saying, kind of tell everyone what they did, share the process. I think a lot of it was based off of giddiness of like, can you believe we get to do this? More than them consciously trying to educate another generation. But it is why those two guys and their movies across these like 15 years primarily are so influential. We're so activating for so many artists in different mediums because you were getting the pieces in that kind of way. And you were getting the supplemental material, all the merchandising and all the stuff, the adaptations, all that helps keep the movie alive in your mind, but they're also doing interviews. Fan culture is rising. There are places like, Starlog and whatever that they can like talk to where these things can be distributed and then lodge into heads forever.
So, and the same thing was going on in comics, where there's a lot of our masters were not giving. Like Jack Kirby often refers to it as a job. I have to make sales.
Jack Kirby was the John Ford of comics. Yeah.
And not in a, but he's never cranky like John Ford, but certainly would not give up. I am an artist until his much later years, when enough people were yelling at him, "You're an artist," that he finally said, okay, I'm an artist. But so there was like getting any kind of information about how to do any of this was really, you felt like an archaeologist. You felt like you had to like really sift through issues of Comics Buyer's Guide and Comic Scene magazine and Starlog, looking for just any kind of information about how to tell a story or what. So anytime someone like Lucas and Spielberg particularly really couldn't wait to tell you how the magic trick worked, it was deeply exciting. I am also interested in that they kind of stopped doing that after a while. Like there was a window well into but by the time they get to the third Indiana Jones, they have stopped sharing. He doesn't do director's commentaries, and if you think of anyone's doing director's commentaries, it's him. It's Spielberg, because like it feels like all director's commentaries beholden to him, and he didn't do them, and it was strange and appealing at the same time that he stopped sharing. I found that deeply fascinating.
I want to swivel back to your child. Like, so 1980, you see Empire Strikes Back. You have this experience with the cliffhanger. 1981, Raiders of the Lost Ark comes out.
So you're 14, Is that right?
So I'm 13. Yeah,
13.
I'm 13, 14 years old.
How aware are you of this coming down the pike? Like, what's
all in?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Like
that's the thing. How it was sold to us, and it's funny, when I was talking to people about doing this, a couple of people said, "What could you possibly say about Raiders of the Lost Ark that hasn't been said?"
This is the issue we get into sometimes.
The challenge of these episodes.
When we do the most totemic movies of all time. Like, it is kind of impossible to overstate the impact of Raiders of the Lost Ark when you're like, oh, it was one of the most successful movies of all time. It launched one of the most enduring franchises in history. It is like key movie star text, key filmmaking text. It is like a movie that everyone is still kind of ripping off or trying to like chase. And then you're also like, it was fucking nominated for Best Picture. Like, it just kind of did everything.
Yeah.
Everything, right? Everything that could be. So here's what I came up. They go, what is there left to discuss with Raiders of the Lost that hasn't been discussed? And I go, I honestly don't think I've heard a serious conversation about this movie post Fabelmans, which to me completely changed my perspective on some of the elements of this movie and what he was doing and why he was doing it, including the fact that he lived with the monkey. He lived with the monkey. I never, in the 57 years I've been alive on this planet, knew that young Steven Spielberg lived with this little monkey. My kids are growing up with a little Chihuahua. My wife has a Chihuahua, our pandemic dog, and I wonder which one of my kids will make art out of the out of the Chihuahua, like Spielberg had to with the monkey. So it's just like, so there's that, and also like I have a very deep memory of how we were sold Steven Spielberg of the time, and it was all keeping it light and keeping it based compared to Fabelmans. But like I remember my mom going, Steven Spielberg gave his mother a Bloomingdale's card with no limit. Like she can go to Bloomingdale's, buy whatever she wants whenever she wants.
Right. Brian, if you like telling stories, this is what you need to aspire to be, and then how you need to handle that level of success.
So that was always like, and I'm saying, well, I'm going to be a comic creator, so that would be no problem at all for me to accomplish that goal. But but it's so interesting that it was such a it was my mom really trying to share with me like some kind of information about this thing that I won't shut up about, right? So she heard something, she shared it with me, but it did still with me. Oh, like the mother relationship, and then you see it for real laid out later in his later work and in Fabelmans. You're like, oh, Took him a long time to get there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and it took us a long time in our history to get around to the balanced due of early Spielberg.
Mhm.
I'm so fucking happy we waited to do
Till
it until post Fablemans.
Yeah.
Because it
out.
does really make all of these movies
Make a little bit more sense or whatever. I mean,
or just interesting from different
more
angles.
interesting.
Now, when I watch a movie like this, which I've seen a number of times, you know, I feel like I talked about this a little bit when we did our Crystal Skull episode 8 million years ago, an episode that wasn't controversial at all.
Good movie.
But like Indiana Jones was a weird blind spot for me. I do
remember you talking about this. It's not your franchise in the way that, say, Star Wars.
Well, it just wasn't. And like I had the baby version of what you're describing with Star Wars, which is I didn't see them until the special editions came out. So I had that thing of the movies being released 1 month apart and feeling like, oh, there's a kid at school who says he has a VHS of Empire Strikes Back, but that's cheating. I need to wait 3 weeks until Empire comes out in February, you know? And like people at school being like, Darth Vader's their dad, right? And I'm like, that's impossible. What the fuck are you talking about? But having this mini 3-month arc of needing to wait to see the next one. I just never seen Indiana Jones. And I feel like it was a movie that most kids I know were like shown when they were 5.
I don't know if
that was the thing that like parents just passed down to people very early. I feel like it was a thing I knew through osmosis. I saw 8,000 parodies of the boulder rolling. I knew what the theme song was. I could make jokes about Indiana Jones, but like I just never got around to watching them. And then when Crystal Skull was coming out, my roommate at the time, Spike, was like, how have you never seen these? Gave me his DVD box set. I watched all 3 of them, I think, in the week leading up to Crystal Skull. So a lot of my opinion of Crystal Skull is also like shifted by I didn't have decades of living with this thing in expectation before I saw the one that everyone got angry about. Like those 4 movies all were seen for the first time in the same week for me.
I can't even imagine what that feels like.
Exactly.
That's crazy. Yeah.
And I have, in whatever it's been, the 15 years since then, more, 18, gone back to watch Raiders a lot. And every time I do, I try to sort of like remove layers of my awareness and try to get myself into the headspace of just watching this as a pure object.
Right. You're just sitting in the theater, Harrison Ford's in it, but that's all you know. And you just watch this extremely fun, rip-roaring adventure.
Right.
Like
the thing I cannot even imagine is for you being your age, your generation, already invested in this shit, the mere news of, hey, Spielberg and Lucas are going to make a movie together must have been fucking mind-blowing. That these 2 guys are like, neck and neck chasing each other. That they're friends. That's part of the mythology, that these guys are buddies. They kind of come out of the same soup. They're 2 sides of like the same coin. Here's like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones inspiring each other. And then it's like they're unifying their powers. Here's like the mega project.
And I remember, and that was like how interesting is, yes, he's the director of the films. And so, but I remember it growing up as it's a Steven Spielberg joint that Lucas is part of, right? But when you read the transcripts, which is part of what I was excited to bring to the George Lucas talk show, that you read the transcripts and it is shocking how much Lucas had this locked down. Like he really had this figured out from the get-go in a way that's even stronger than the way he had Star Wars locked down. Star Wars was always, building and building and building until it became what it was, right? Including the scroll. Like everything was like stuck onto it as it went. But he really sat down with those guys and goes, here's what we're doing, and had like major parts of it locked down. I love this transcript. For those who don't know, online you can find the literally the transcript and the recording of Spielberg, Lucas, and Kasdan just working it out, just doing a little mini writer's room and figuring it out. And it is glorious for someone like me who always sat there and going, why is it so hard for me to figure out how to create things, right? And then when you see the 3 masters in a room also not figuring it out right away. I mean, my favorite moment in the transcript is when someone says, maybe Marion's the villain. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, because you're sitting there going, that's not a bad story. Like, that's not a bad way to go with this. But oh my God, I'm so glad they didn't. And oh my God, I'm so glad they shared this with, like, just the idea of the multiverse of madness that could have come out of that room is so brilliant to me. And I just was so impressed with George Lucas in those transcripts. So you really get to see the magic that is him at full blast.
Well, it's
Anyway,
right. It's the whole thing about him that is so fascinating and maddening at the same time, where you're like, this guy who just like had this incredible flow state period and a weird lack of self-awareness, where he was either like so right or so wrong. And there is like a pretty dramatic moment where the pendulum kind of swings. And it's so easy now, I feel like in a modern context, people sort of write him off and go like, oh, he's like a broken clock that was right twice a day, you know? But everyone else around him made really good decisions and people saved him from his
yeah.
worst instincts. And Raiders is like, as you said, this thing he basically brings to Spielberg and is like, I'm hiring you to direct this.
Mhm.
Like, this is a for-hire job for you to execute my vision of this thing I've mapped out. And this is a movie that has like 4 primary authors in Spielberg, Lucas, Kasdan, and Ford, where the movie doesn't work if you're missing any one of those 4 guys. But I do think they all, in a lot of ways, contribute equally to the soup of the thing, even if
Absolutely.
Lucas is primarily the first 25%. It's also, I mean, good moment to crack open the dossier, but talk about this as a comeback movie. This is a movie that like largely stems out of 2 failures, which are like the miss of 1941 and Spielberg being like, have I fucked up? Combined with all his movies up until then had gone over budget, over schedule, were lauded, were successful. You know, he had the Jaws Close Encounters thing like as feathers in his cap. But the second 1941 bombs, it's like, well, now we can acknowledge that this guy is not infallible. And maybe it's not worth putting up with his shit if sometimes he's going to make something like that.
That costs us a lot of money as along with everything else.
And then the other big thing is Spielberg desperately wanting to be the first American to direct a James Bond movie, a thing that he keeps getting fucking rejected from doing. He's made 2 of the biggest movies of all time, and they will not let him through the door.
I like that rejection at this level hits him so hard that even decades later, he still brings it up. Like, he's still kind of mad he didn't get to direct a James Bond.
Right, that he was like, I made fucking Jaws. Like, what more do you want out of somebody?
So the dossier, I am opening it. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Steven Spielberg. They are admirers before they're friends, we should say, right? Like, George is a little older than Spielberg. Is that right? Or at least he's a little more, he's creatively further along than Spielberg, right? Like, George Lucas is already established by the time that Spielberg is emerging as a filmmaker. Spielberg.
Well, Lucas is also part of Coppola's situation for a long time.
Like, there's all these stories of, Lucas is 3 years older than him.
Okay. But the other interesting thing is that, like, Lucas goes to film school, right? Like, links up with all these people, comes out with a better reputation faster in a certain way than Spielberg, who is the wonderkind who skips straight to a studio contract.
Yes.
But is not getting that sort of prestige around him. Whereas Lucas, it's like you have Coppola and everyone saying, like, this guy's a genius.
But yeah, so Coppola and Lucas et al. All notice Spielberg when Duel comes out on TV. And after American Graffiti comes out, George Lucas starts to daydream of like, let's make a sort of B picture at an A picture scale, right? Like an old Republic film serial from the 30s and 40s, your Flash Gordons and all that. But how he has this idea of like a 1930s style supernatural grave robber archaeologist type thing, right? That's the Indiana Smith is the character he comes up with.
No notes. Perfect name.
And he does, I mean, this is George Lucas's original conception does sound about right, which is like college professor goes off on adventures, also can be found at a nightclub with like 30s ladies on his arms, right? He brings in Philip Kaufman, who is, where's Philip Kaufman at this point? He was already an established filmmaker to sort of flesh it out. Kaufman is like, drop the nightclub and the ladies for now. Like, you don't really need that. You more want this to be like this kind of like intellectual / adventurer thing. Like, he's a professor, but he's also fighting the Nazis. He's smart, but he also is finding like magic shit. Right? Because that's the thing about Indiana Jones. We're like, oh, he's like this smart professor. And he's like, yeah, that's that magic box from God. And you're like, what? And he's like, who knows? Or maybe it's just a box. I don't know. But it might be like have like Jewish magic inside of it. Don't open it.
That all these movies are like about the meeting place between like hard facts and science and history and like inexplicable religious phenomena.
So as Lucas is developing this, his other passion project, Star Wars, takes off.
Mhm.
So
And
Star Wars happens.
how did that turn out?
I don't know. I can't check right now. I
Okay.
think it did okay.
Okay.
But in
But to the theme of your podcast, it does seem that Raiders of the Lost Ark is his blank check.
A little
Star
bit.
Wars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
A little bit.
Right. Because, I mean, obviously, Empire and Jedi, it's like, well, he now owns the rights. He gets to, like, turn this into, like, an industry and map out where Star Wars goes. But there's a certain extent of, like, they're not an obligation, but it's like, well, of course, I have to keep doing Star Wars. This feels like the second major new thing he is creating.
Well, the other thing that happens right after Star Wars comes out and begins to conquer the world is that Steven Spielberg goes on vacation with George Lucas.
Yes.
They go to Hawaii. Spielberg is wrapping up on Close Encounters, which also comes out in 1977, of course. And Spielberg mentions offhandedly, like, a dream of mine is to make like a James Bond movie. And George Lucas is like, I have that beat.
I have something better than
Right.
that.
I have the same basic idea, but better. And it's this Raiders of the Lost Ark idea. And as Spielberg says on hearing it, he said, I felt like I was eating a barrel of popcorn at a noon matinee. Like, because it's basically just like, you can do a James Bond movie, but with a more fun aesthetic, a more you aesthetic in a way, right? Not this British spy aesthetic.
Right. What is the American James Bond?
Right.
Yeah.
And it can be a globe-trotting adventure that's fun, like, and all that. And Spielberg says he had called Cubby Broccoli after Jaws came out, being like, hello, do you want to hire me? Like begging him for Bond. And that's not how Broccoli did business, right? Like he had his like 3 British guys who did the, John Glenn and Guy Hamilton, those guys. Like, he's not going to hire this American wunderkind. So he's not going to make James Bond.
I feel like it's part of the fascinating mythology of this movie that, like, even, and I imagine this was the case with you, Brian, like the George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, like Hawaii beach conversations have taken on this mythical quality over time, where there were all these kind of regular powwows they would do at these sort of like check-ins at like the parallel moments in their career. There's the infamous story of before Close Encounters and Star Wars come out, and they're both absolutely terrified about how their movies are going to do. And they consider making a deal to swap profit participation. Like each one thinks the other guy's movie is going to work.
They're both like, God. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And the fascinating thing of you're just like, it boggles the mind that there was space for both Star Wars and Close Encounters to exist at that level in the same year. It feels like a case where the audience would vote on which version of a sci-fi movie they wanted. And both of them working to that extent is insane.
I believe Aaron Sorkin will one day write a movie about 3 vacations of Lucas and Spielberg at their different ages.
That would be fun. So Philip Kaufman nominally is the first choice to direct the movie because he had worked with Lucas on it at a certain point, but Philip Kaufman loses interest. So Lucas brings it back to Spielberg more officially. Are you interested? Yes, I am. And so then they look for a screenplay, a writer to actually write a full screenplay. They really just have like a story sketched out. And they read this script called Continental Divide that had been written by Larry Kasdan, who had only written another script called The Bodyguard.
Yes,
which
right.
not
Takes
yet
a
been
while
made.
to get made. And Continental Divide is the one that ends up being the Belushi movie?
Yes.
Yeah.
But they like these scripts.
Yeah.
So they they think he has a Howard Hawksian sensibility, very fun. And so they're just basically like, will you turn this into a proper screenplay for us?
It's wild that they kind of take a flyer on him. It's wild that he was so firmly the right choice when neither of those scripts seem to be obvious indicators.
Right. Speak to a Raiders thing.
Right. And then he obviously has his like time in the Lucasfilm trenches, but then you look at what his career becomes once he goes off as his own director, and it does feel weird to be like, wait, right, Raiders was written by the guy who did Mumford?
Sure.
Or even Body Heat. Like, did you pitch Spielberg Body Heat? Like, did that?
Yeah,
Did
that's
that
right. Did that
conversation
come
ever
up?
happen?
Right. Yeah.
Which was at the time, for people to know, the sexiest thing that had ever been
It's a hot
on
movie.
the
I
cable.
mean,
Yeah.
It's one
get
of
it
Connor's
when you watch
favorite
it.
things to bring up,
Right,
which
that
is
little
true.
Larry Kasdan wrote Body Heat. No,
Well,
what?
no, that
Right.
Lucas produced Body Heat, but
Oh, he
had
did?
his name removed from it because he
Oh.
thought that people would be turned off of the movie being sexy with his name attached. It's like the Mel Brooks Elephant Man thing, where it's like they'll think it's a comedy. He's like, if my name is on it, it will not be taken seriously as an erotic work.
It's fair.
Wow, I did not know
Yes.
that one. That's a great one. That's
Okay.
fantastic.
So Lucas and Spielberg, they do fight a little bit. As Spielberg puts it, like, George loves logic, and sometimes you'll get sort of swallowed up by the logic, right? Like trying to make a fun story. But George will back off when you are like, no, I want to do this, and I'm going to go shoot my movie. He says George is a bit like Disney. He does put a vision out there that's so attractive, you'd be a fool or a slave to your own ego if you denied it just because it didn't come from you. Interesting. Their biggest dispute was Tote, the evil German guy, Ronald Lacey's character. Spielberg wanted to have a prosthetic hand that was like a machine gun and a flamethrower, and they have like concept art that they had built up with this, and George Lucas was like, that's the wrong genre. Like, that's sci-fi.
Right.
Like,
That's-
I don't care
that's
how cool that
Jaws.
sounds. Right. Like,
That's fucking James Bond shit.
yeah, that's too much.
Yeah.
Like, we're not having a robot armed Nazi.
Right.
Right. And in my opinion, George Lucas, as metal as that sounds, like, George Lucas completely correct. Like, these guys are all the scarier because they're just three fucking guys in hats who are like, maybe Hitler would like this coffin.
But it is fascinating when the James Bond franchise is so based on technology, right? That the cornerstone
with
of
the
the thing
gadgets,
is that
yes.
Q is showing you the 10 new objects and what the car can do and all of that. That they're making this movie where they're like, technology's not the thing, but also magic exists.
Like
right.
Star Wars,
Right.
like changed James Bond. They went into outer space.
Right.
James Bond
That's
went to the moon because
Yes.
of Star Wars. So
He raped that moon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
So Indiana Smith, there's a Steve McQueen movie called Nevada Smith. So Spielberg's like, what do we do about that? And they're like, Indiana Jones. So there you go. That's how that happened. And yes, there is the famous transcript that Brian was referencing that does have the infamous moment where they reference, like, how young should Marion have been when they had this tryst?
Yes.
That when you read it now, you're like a little skeeved out by. But they are sort of playing with how, like, shocking or transgressive can they make it. The movie is very vague about it. It has the kind of like, I was old enough, but like, it does not throw down any numbers.
No, I mean, I think an incredibly wise decision. I think it's like a perfect kind of Spielberg. What are, at this point in time, his judgment, 1941 aside, is sort of so impeccable about, like, what is the information you need to give the audience and what do they not need to be concerned with. Like, he just knows how to portion out the exact right amount of visual information, narrative information, backstory, and whatever. If numbers are left out only because he thought it was like excess fat, it is a decision that has greatly helped the legacy of the movie.
Definitely.
Long term.
So Kasdan, he writes the script, takes 6 months. He said he basically never checked in with them, just went off and did it himself. Steven's working on 1941. George is working on Empire Strikes Back. They give him a researcher named W. Fine, who brings him all this research about, like, Hitler and the occult and Egypt at the time and all that stuff. He delivers the script, and George is like, let's take lunch. And they sit down, and George is like, do you want to write Empire Strikes Back? I'm like working on this sequel. And Larry Kasdan's like, do you want to read this script first? And he was like, I'll read it, but you have the job. I'll call you tomorrow if I hate this script. And, he didn't have to renege on the offer.
But, like, Lucas had basically become his own studio at this point. Like, this is the weird thing of he's insulating these guys from, like, studio notes. And perhaps there are early signs of things that will plague later Lucas Productions in this attitude where it's like, guess what? Like, Larry Kasdan was the right horse to bet on.
Yes. And he had a feeling
Objectively.
about him, and he was right.
It might be a little insane to just be like, I'm not reading this draft. I'm hiring you to write another thing.
Yeah, to write The Empire Strikes Back. Like, once again, like a thing where it's like, you weren't even in with the last Star Wars movie, but I don't care. I want you to write this. some stuff that got cut though. There was a somewhat of a love triangle between Marion and Bellick and Indy.
Mm-hmm.
They got rid of that. Just a lot of the stuff they cut was just like, this thing needs to move. Like, just pare it down. They go to now they have this package. Lucas producing, Spielberg's directing, Kasdan wrote it, Frank Marshall is also producing it, right? And they take it to Hollywood essentially, and they're like, let's make the greatest deal in the history of Hollywood. Like, I think they truly were like, I guess 1941 hadn't come out yet too, so they are like big swinging dicks,
right? But that's the big
also,
difference.
If 1941's got like a tail to it, but at the time, even though it was a big loud thing that wasn't Close Encounters, but it didn't fail. It was like on cable.
You're right. It wasn't. Yes,
like it
wasn't.
Just sat on Showtime. There were certain movies that just lived on Showtime and became like part of our consciousness. Not all good. Like,
no, of course not. Right. It's a somewhat of a long tail cult thing. I mean, yes, it failed at the lofty expectations of a Steven Spielberg follow-up.
There's this infamous story about in, I guess, the early 2000s when Eisner was overseeing, Michael Eisner, who's also involved in this film, but Eisner was overseeing the Pixar rollout of the 5-film deal that he had made around Toy Story, right? And the movies were getting bigger and bigger and more lauded. And other Disney execs were like, we need to come up with a plan for how we continue our relationship with Pixar, because our contract with them is going to run out and their value is going up so much, they're going to have all the negotiating leverage. And Eisner said to them, they're going to have a flop. And when they have a flop, they'll come back to us and we hold the cards and we pounce. Right. And then the next movie that came out was Finding Nemo, was the highest grossing animated film of all time. And they were like, you fucked up.
Right. You could have had this. Yeah. They bet on the wrong way.
You could have had it. And it's one of the things that leads to Eisner's downfall, right? I think within the industry, there was a similar thing going on with Spielberg, where like Eisner was scared at that moment with Pixar. They are never going to be able to receive any oversight because they've done so well without our interference up till this point that they're not scared of us. And I think Spielberg's success was so meteoric just on like Jaws and Close Encounters back to back that I think the industry probably was excited for 1941 to not work, because it's like, maybe this guy's come down to earth. Maybe he can be controlled now. But the fact that he has already set up this deal with Lucas, that Lucas is the one who basically is putting himself in the position to have oversight over him. And that on top of that, he himself now has this chip on his shoulder of like, I want to prove them wrong and become responsible.
The deal they're offering to these studios, to be clear, is like, we own the movie, George owns the negative, you get action for distributing it, like you get some money. Universal says no. Fox and Disney and Warner Brothers say no. Paramount is like, okay, even though this is going to need to make like $60 million domestic before we even, see any money, we'll take the risk. Obviously, it was a good gamble by them. But this is before the days of like, well, no, we need to own the intellectual property, because the whole point is we can then create whole universes around the television, video games, action figures, and all that.
But it's the legendary Lucas deal where he gives up his salary and his points as a director on Star Wars to retain the control and the merch, and like the deal that, people say like the last time that will ever fucking happen. The studios made that mistake one time, but they gave Lucas the power to be able to just demand that as his terms from here on out.
So, Eisner is the guy at Paramount who makes it happen, just FYI. And they get 60-40 grosses until the grosses reach $35 million, and then it goes to 50-50. All merchandising and franchise rights remain with George Lucas. Sequels are planned from the jump, but, they have approval and all that. Harrison Ford is not the first choice to play Indiana Jones, as I feel like Tom Selleck is often listed as the famous first choice that like passed on it. And I think it's like, that is kind of true. He was committed to Magnum PI, and they definitely like screen tested him, and they liked that he looked like Jim Steranko, the famous comic book illustrator. had done some concept art that kind of looked like
He
Tom Selleck.
certainly looks like a classic square-jawed pulp hero.
Right.
Even a little more than Harrison Ford, who's obviously maybe the hottest man who ever lived.
Harrison Ford's so handsome.
Yes.
But have you seen this concept art?
Has he seen the concept
I'm
art?
just making sure.
Did I just show you the cup for Christ? Anyway, so yes, but here, so Jim Steranko, for those who don't know, is kind of like one of our Orson Welles in comics.
Yes,
like
the greatest.
he was at the time miles ahead of what everything that was going on in mainstream comics, and most famous for kind of creating the Nick Fury that people would refer to as Nick Fury up until Samuel L. Jackson, like the cigar chopping.
But when you
white
see
version of
his Nick Fury stuff, like it feels like it's from 80 years in the future, right? You're like,
Yes.
I can't believe this is from the 60s or whenever it was,
Yes,
it feels
and
so modern.
But Nick Fury, his Nick Fury looks like Tom Selleck, right? Like Tom Selleck looks like the sort of archetypical handsome action star of comics of the 60s and 70s and 80s in just kind of the impossible jawline, cheekbones, chin.
Yeah, and so the look, the what you refer to as Indiana Jones is right there, right up front in these storyboards and concept art pieces as Steranko did. Sometimes he is very, very credited with this, sometimes not in a weird way. Like I'm always interested in, because one of my favorite things about Steven Spielberg that will repeat for sure during this whole run that you're doing now is how generous he is about giving people credit for really big things in Steven Spielberg's career. Like, oh, the boulder was this person's idea. Like he'll never take credit for something that was someone else's idea, which, as we know in Hollywood, is unicorn behavior, and and certainly something that I even I will aspire to that. Like I looked at that as that's someone I want to grow up to be. Like someone who always can give credit where credit is due.
Beyond that, I feel like he often will frame it as, here was my bad first idea. And thank God this other person came in with the intervention. Like he's, in talking about this sort of open source way of understanding how these things are made through the way he tells you about their making, he's explaining to you what the bad draft was. And then crediting the person who had the spark of inspiration. Which this is a deeply collaborative movie.
Right, it is.
The Selleck thing, there's the infamous kind of American Graffiti Carrie shared casting sessions. Or no, it's Carrie and Star Wars.
Carrie, yeah, sure.
I think.
Yeah.
But then American Graffiti has its own casting session. This sort of generation. Am I wrong about this, Brian?
I thought it was Carrie and American Graffiti begat
You're right.
Star Wars.
You're right.
Like that was okay.
Yes. There's all that pooled casting pot though of all the kind of young actors in the 70s who read for all of these movies, kept on going in. Lucas had this very specific kind of bugbear of I don't want to reuse actors.
That's part. Yeah, he's the one who's Harrison in another thing. Let's not they also Peter Coyote and Tim Matheson are two names they like.
Yes.
Well, when you watch the screen tests, you got your Magnum PI, and I it feels like they did give it to him, but when you watch the screen test, even you're like, yeah, no, it's Harrison Ford. But the one that's closest in the screen test is Tim Matheson. Looks like, well, if I was seriously looking at that footage and I had to make a choice, that Tim Matheson is interesting, but not Harrison Ford. It's just not there. And also
in that
the Sean Young of it all.
Well, yes. But the kind of American Graffiti, Animal House, all these movies that are kind of these incubators of here's the next wave of people who's going to pop and who's going to be a movie star. Harrison Ford infamously had to fight really hard to get Lucas to consider him from Star Wars because he had found all these young actors for American Graffiti and then was like, I don't want to repeat the same cast. I need new faces. That's why he's doing this pooled casting session and trying to find new people. And Harrison Ford's the reader. And finally, he's like, I guess I can't deny this fucking guy. But I think going into Raiders, he feels even more so I can't do this a third time.
Well, he had famously, Ford refused to sign a 3-picture deal to play Han Solo, which is why he kind of has them over a barrel. when they're doing the other movies where he's like, please kill me off. And they're like, no, you know. So George is like, he's going to do that again. Harrison Ford reads the script to Raiders of the Lost Ark and immediately signs a 3-picture deal. So he's like very, very on board in a way that I guess he's more enthusiastic. And he, you know, Spielberg is like, the initial concept of this character was like two-fisted lover, cad, hellion, right? You know, like Harrison takes him out of that mold a little bit. Like makes him feel a little like more like one foot in each world, right? Like, you know, a little more academic, but also a little more like gritty and grounded. I mean, how to describe what Harrison Ford is doing?
Especially when
here.
like Han Solo is like kind of the ultimate finesse character, and you obviously have your big moments where like his guard comes down.
Well,
you
the whole
realize how much
magic
he's
of Han Solo
bluffing.
is that he's full of shit. Like,
Exactly.
in Star Wars,
right?
I do have a hot take here.
Go ahead.
If you will join me on this, and if not, that's okay. But I, having grown up with this, part of my perspective of Harrison Ford is altered a little bit by the existence of a movie called The Frisco Kid. Yes,
the Gene Wilder picture.
Absolutely, yeah.
So in Cleveland, where I grew up,
which he makes in between. It comes out in between Star Wars and Empire, right? That's
yes.
like, or maybe, yeah, it's like 79.
It's one of his like first follow-up. What do I do now that I'm a movie star? Movies,
right?
Yeah,
yes. It's a Western comedy starring a very, very into it Gene Wilder playing a very loud rabbi. And Harrison Ford playing a gunslinger of Harrison Ford energy, and it's basically a road picture where where Han Solo was taking a rabbi across the thing, and eventually they get to meet each other's cultures and kind of like figure out stuff. This was the most Jewish movie I had ever seen in my life at this age, and in Cleveland it played in a theater in the Jewish neighborhood, in the Center Mayfield Theater in Cleveland, Ohio, every Saturday for years.
Oh, wow.
And it played like fucking Rocky Horror Picture Show. I mean, I play like after Shabbos, the Jews would come and watch Han Solo give us representation. And then of course people would whisper, you know, he's Jewish. Like this is now made famous by
Harrison Ford, a quarter Jewish, not too shabby. Yeah,
made famous by Adam Sandler's Hanukkah song.
Yeah,
but as Jews, we'd call them. We at least the Jews I knew had declared
don't forget,
him.
don't you forget, he is Jewish. He's Jewish.
So watching Raiders in particular, and it codes very Jewish. Like Indiana Jones codes. Han Solo doesn't code Jewish, but Indiana Jones absolutely does code as a Jewish action hero, and Marion also codes Jewish. And for me at the time, I could feel it. I could like they're Spielberg's bringing it right to the table, and that was part of also how we got to know him as a little Jewish boy done right. Right? Like,
yes,
done good. Yeah.
But the whole aspect of this movie being this like Nazi revenge movie, right? It goes beyond just being, an adventure film in which the Nazis are easy villains because we all know who to root for in that situation, or at least hope that one would know who to root for in that situation. Is heightened by it being all about like basically the intervention of God. And this sort of like course correction that possibly, arguably creates an alternate timeline. You know,
I have a very strong memory of like when where we're seeing the movie, and then the Ark is in the basement of the submarine not being attended to, and then God kind of like blocks out the Nazi symbol with kind of an amorphous shape that kind of looks like a mug and David. It's got like 6 stars, like almost, and my mom like elbowed me and went Mug and David, and I'm like, it's not like, oh my god, like it's like it was like, oh my god, is God just got some ass? Like it's everything about it was like it's a 10 Commandments sequel. Like it was just everything about it was strange, and I didn't know what was happening. But
that's what's so fascinating about this coming fairly formed from Lucas first is that he's like a hyper wasp. And then he like assigns Larry Kasdan and Spielberg to be the ones who actually realize this thing. And through some combination of like conscious effort and just their own mentality and their history and their background, all this stuff gets coded into it. But like Lucas is the one who's designing this around the Ark of the Covenant and the tablets and all of that, right?
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, having watched all 4 of them in a weekend, did any of this click with you?
No, absolutely not. I like when I was watching them for the first time, I remember, here's like a very distinctive memory I have. Watching the first one, this was in the worst apartment I ever lived in, where my bedroom was the living room, where the TV was, and I slept on 2 mattresses behind a couch. And I watched the movie and I came out and I knocked on Spike's bedroom and he said, "So what do you think?" And I went, "Yeah, it's a lot of fun." And he was like, "A lot of fun? What are you talking about? It's the best movie ever made." And I was like, "No, it's like a fun movie." And then I don't like Temple of Doom very much. I'm excited to rewatch it.
Yeah, but it's a flawed movie.
I have always struggled with it.
Yeah.
And like Last Crusade has always been the one that is my favorite.
Yeah, it's a very Griffey movie.
It's a very Griffey movie, and I feel like is a very Buster Keaton movie in particular. There was something that clicked for me in watching that one of like, oh, that's the huge part of the DNA of these movies is silent comedy and not just the adventure serials. That one brings it to the forefront. So that's when I sort of really locked in. And I saw Crystal Skull and was like, half of that works for me, half of it doesn't. It doesn't feel sacrilegious because I haven't lived with this my whole life.
I mean, right. I mean, for me, I always had locked into the 3 movies before Crystal Skull existed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're all religious in a different way. Like, this is about Jewish mysticism. Temple of Doom is about Hindu mysticism. Last Crusade's about Christian, you know, sort of folk, right, mysticism. And it's sort of annoying that Crystal Skull doesn't have any of that. Crystal Skull's doing the thing where it's like, well, now it's the 50s. So what was the genre of the 50s is, you know, is more like sci-fi. We're going to do aliens. And I just wish it had picked a lane, but we can talk about it.
We devoted a whole episode to it. Yeah. I think that movie is trying to, find a way to split the atom.
Jewish mystic undertones of Raiders of the Lost Ark are fun to me because I think this movie is dark and scary and weird in a way that I love. Temple of Doom, you know, presses on that pedal a little too hard. And I kind of enjoy how nasty it is, but it's a mean-spirited movie in a way this isn't. But this movie is sort of haunted, like, and scary, and it's fun, but it's also like, yeah, it's kind of terrifying to consider what's going on.
There was also a lightning in a bottle thing with this movie. I mean, let's dig into actually like talking about the movie itself as it plays out. You know, you start with one of the most infamous opening sequences of all time. That is, you're just dropped right into the action of the most like thrilling series of incidents imaginable as you watch this guy basically do his like side gig, which is being the coolest movie hero in history, you know, and avoiding slings and arrows.
And as someone who was there, I can tell you that the thrill ride that is the first 10, 15 minutes of the movie is overwhelming as experiencing it for the first time. It is incredible. These are Spielberg pulling out tricks we have not seen him do before, stuff he would master and everything, but all of this is just working. And by the time he goes, "I hate snakes," your breath is just gone, in a way that so few movies can achieve. It's an incredible experience.
I want to unpack it more fully, but like the back-to-back of that and then him in the university, right? And to this point of my experience watching them for the first time, this is a movie that I've now like rewatched maybe every 2 years because I'm really like, I should study this more as a thing. Not that I need to deepen my appreciation, but I'm like, there's an element of catch-up to a certain extent. Ketchup Entertainment, of course, our finest distributor. But even though I like prefer Last Crusade, I almost never rewatch it because I'm like, I know I think that movie's fun, but there's something in the codex of this movie that is so like distributed.
You prefer Last Crusade to Raiders?
It's just my sensibility, I think. I mean, but we'll see how the rewatch goes.
No, it's deeply, that's fast. I make no judgment.
I wouldn't say it was better by any argument. Yeah, but it's I think a lot of it's the comedy of it. But the immediate like thrill ride you're saying, followed by the university, and just the feeling of, oh, this is just this guy's life. What we just saw wasn't the craziest thing that's ever happened to him. That's another adventure, and then he just flies back and teaches a class, right? There's a lightning in a bottle thing in this movie that the other movies can't totally recapture in the same way. And I think Temple of Doom being a prequel makes this even more of an issue. To your point, which is all the weird spooky mysticism of it is really fascinating when you're like, this is the first time this guy is challenged in this way, which isn't to say it's the greatest challenge of his life, but it's like the greatest ideological challenge of his life, which is, I don't believe in this shit.
No. Yeah. Right. He is kind of a Mulder and Scully together. Like, he's like, look, I believe that this object may be the quote unquote lost ark or whatever, but I'm not sure I believe that means it's going to have magic inside of it. I
But
just
like,
sort of,
I do scary shit for a living.
yeah,
I'm
right.
constantly encountering weird shit. It is all explainable.
Yeah.
There's a certain like power this movie has to being the one film that is him having to realize that there's a lot about the world he doesn't understand, and a tremendous amount of skill in how much that is not a wildly overstated sort of plot to the movie. It is kind of just like a minor thread running the whole time.
Yes, to everything you're saying. It also it's the game of expectation. Like, you see the poster, you know who Han Solo is, you know who Harrison Ford is, you know the credits. You're obsessing over that. You're looking at the Topps trading cards ahead of the movie's release, trying to figure out what you think the movie is. And I can't express enough, having these collector cards is really all you have. And Star Wars has made them like statements of fact and looks inside that you're only going to get from these Topps trading cards. So once the Raiders ones hit, they're like the encyclopedia of everything you're going to know. And then the movie comes and you're 10 minutes in and expectations met, exceeded, and now completely surprising you. Oh, not who you thought he was. He is a nerdy professor. And also, I think that the reason that none of us tripped on the Marion's age thing when we saw it in the theater was because that scene when the student blinks and has written "love you" on his eyes, and he reacts maturely, like there's no skeevy reaction to it. So he's not a skeevy piece of shit. Like, he's not like there was an excuse there for him to like wink or do something gross, and he did not. Like, that is not who he is. So when Marion says, "I was a child," I did not think she was an actual child. I thought, this is someone who's
right. She's saying,
yeah.
you know, I was too young, and he's, you know, you're older than me, which he is. But like,
Yeah, no, but I remember when Twitter hit that a few years ago with "wait, what?" And I was like, oh yeah, that does ring badly.
Well,
But I never
yes.
thought it the whole time.
It's
I
this
was a kid.
fascinating thing of like, that line is a vestige of clearly the development of being like, what if she was literally a child? And it plays in the context of the finished movie more like, I was young, you know?
Yeah.
Like the way we talk about, like, I was like, my brain wasn't fully formed yet, you know? These things where there like was a power dynamic, but they're also close enough in age, the two actors, in a way where you're just like, okay, so they were like on opposite sides of a narrow developmental line, maybe. But you're right. Like every one of those characterization choices is so impactful. It's the other, we've talked about before how much Harrison Ford loves Indiana Jones, right?
He's always felt more enthusiastic about the sort of legacy and importance of the character versus Han Solo, where he's kind of been in and out on loving Han Solo.
Yeah. And it makes sense because Harrison, how would I put this? He talks so much about like how he approaches acting like a craftsman that he's not very like precious about it, even though I think he has a tremendous amount of technique, and people who work with him are like, he cares a lot more about it than he wants to let on. He tries to play like gruff, I don't give a shit.
Harrison
But
Ford,
he's like a very thoughtful, intentional person.
Sort of red hulky.
Right. And, you know, he has talked about how he had his period of brief frustration, I think, post Star Wars and Indiana Jones, where he's like, great, now I can do anything. I can do Mosquito Coast and I can do whatever. And very quickly it was like, audiences want to see you be Harrison Ford.
Yes, you better not stray too much from the now very established star persona you have.
Right. There's his Inside the Actor Studio is incredible. And James Lipton kind of like pokes him on that. And he says like to the effect of like, what am I going to do? Like cry about the fact that I'm Harrison Ford? I like tried doing other stuff. I very quickly realized like audiences don't love seeing me in that kind of movie or that kind of movie starring me. It doesn't appeal to either audience. I like have peace with where I am. he'll make these jokes about like, I get paid money to fall down. Well, I get it, right? There's that part of it that's kind of blithe.
Right.
But when he talks about the craftsman aspect of it, he's like, my job is to like fulfill the needs, is to like look at the story and go like, what needs to be accomplished in this shot, in this moment, in this line. He thinks about it not in a technical way, but really tied to narrative. You know, it's not about like what is in my heart that I need to get out of my system or what like,
Yeah.
you know, sort of prism of the human psychology am I trying to like capture here? As much as he gets down to the brass tacks of like, this is storytelling. It's visual storytelling. What is conveyed by me like tilting my head 3 degrees, you know, or raising my eyebrows here? It is this, in that sense, this franchise is so perfectly built for him because it is this like episodic, serialized, trying to game out how this guy is making decisions in real time and narrowly just surviving. It is like a structure for a movie and a series that is perfectly suited to the way he thinks as an actor, which is what do I need to do to get the audience to lock into this moment? And what are we trying to convey here? And in that sense, Spielberg is such a good match for him. And it remains so weird that they never work together outside of these movies.
Well, Harrison Ford made a lot of weird choices. I mean, like, I feel like the choices he makes that are like making a good movie within his star persona are like Witness, Working Girl, and then the Jack Ryan movies, things like that, where it's like he's doing a slightly different thing in The Fugitive. Slightly different thing. He's still Harrison Ford. He's the Harrison Ford we know and love. These movies are giant hits. And then there's stuff like Mosquito Coast or Presumed Innocent or Frantic or whatever, where it's like, what if I showed you a darker side? And the audience is usually like, we don't really want to see that. Like, and you watch those movies later and you're like, there's a lot that's interesting about this. And he's really good at darker side stuff, in my opinion.
Well, and to close the loop on a thing we set up fucking 90 minutes ago, but like What Lies Beneath is the first time he weaponizes people don't expect me to be that dark. Right?
Yeah.
And that movie's a big hit and feels like it gets a lot of juice from like, holy shit, you've never seen Harrison Ford like this. And then right after that movie is when you start the era of him feeling like a grump.
Yeah.
Is he tired? Is he bored? Is he too grumpy? Are the movies written around his grumpiness? Is his persona now that he's like at odds with everything? And I think you're right, Brian, that's not until Force Awakens where he kind of owns being elder statesman.
There's a glint in his eye with Force Awakens that there just isn't with so many of these movies.
And I think like we were living through that era every time there was a new big Harrison Ford movie being like, is the magic going to be back this time? Because there's just shit like the opening of this movie where you have this like beautifully, deliberately designed series of shots, the build of the sort of mystery of what's going on, even just down to the fucking the Paramount logo transition, right? Like this movie just like sets you on its course so beautifully. And this sense of like, we're not hiding this guy in shadows, but why are you not showing me his face when he's Harrison Ford? And it's not because there's some twist coming. It's because Spielberg knows he has one chance to make a first impression. And like Harrison Ford knows how to step exactly correctly into the right at the right timing at the right angle and look like $20 million. And
also,
suddenly,
having experienced that walk into the light, it was, yes, we know it's Harrison Ford, but like by the time he walks into light, it's Indiana Jones. It really is a perfectly crafted sequence where you're kind of like shedding Han Solo, which is an enormous like thing over this character, is that he's literally played the most iconic character of our lifetime already.
And the reason you're hiding his face is because you need to be introduced to this character through action before you're thinking of him primarily as Harrison Ford. Everyone knows what they bought a ticket for. Right.
Yeah.
His name is on the poster. His face is on the poster. I'm seeing the Harrison Ford movie. But he's like forcing you to engage with Indiana Jones as an abstract idea before he then has Harrison Ford step into the light. And it's like, and this is who he is now. And you're thinking about this character and not Han Solo. And then you just have this like perfect fucking Rube Goldberg machine sequence of just like the most classical Spielberg like introduction of information in ways that feel charming and effortless, but stick in your brain so that he's setting up the perfect payoffs to come later. The way you build the entrance into the temple versus like what the escape's going to be of repeating the things like the gulf and needing to swing over and the arrows and all that shit. It's like just incredible setup payoff shit.
And because it's so, Molina, and because it's so thrillingly dark and scary and spiders and shadows and, literally, wet skulls. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
We're not like at this age that I'm at.
Mhm.
Like, this is like, I'm feeling very like challenged and seen, like, oh, you're not talking down to me. And then I would learn as I got older, that was kind of Stan Lee's magic too. It's like, I'm not going to talk down to you. You come here. And that was just, you feel respected almost as an audience member, like, oh, and so all the way through Temple of Doom, like they keep like pushing it and pushing it and pushing it in the frame they're at. So when people were complaining about Temple of Doom being too dark, I was like, what? No,
That's
it's
what
not.
this is. Yeah.
This is what this is. Yeah.
I like the opening sequence to this film. I think it's
That's a
quite
bold
fun.
take. Yeah.
I think it's really, really
Alfred
constantly
Molina
thrilling. Yes,
is
Molina,
so
great.
fucking good. This is his first performance ever.
Yep.
But there's like it's
He's already got the character actor eyes.
yeah. Yeah.
Character actor eyes. Say
Yes.
that
But if you
sentence
watch
fast.
the behind the scenes, you can't believe he made another movie because they literally put him in the set and dumped a bunch of spiders
Right,
on
just
him.
tortured him.
And then famously, the spiders wouldn't move. They were just sitting on it. So they go, what you got to do is you got to put a female spider on there, and all the spiders will start getting all excited. And that's what you see when you see the spiders.
Got to create a
crawling over
spider
him.
meat market. Yeah.
Yeah. So and you're sitting, and he's never made a movie before. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I just feels like the worst Hollywood
He has
experience
like the
to start
exact
with.
right energy and
He
such
does.
like
Perfect.
skillful control of the dial of like when he's playing scared, when he's playing cocky.
You just are like, maybe he's actually not going to screw Indy over. And then when he does, he's like, yeah, I could see him screwing
But
Indy
also
over.
you're like, is this guy competent enough that Indy's in trouble that
Right.
he's going to get away with it?
Right.
Is he overstepping? Yeah.
It's a lot of, right, what you're saying. Like, like a lot of stuff being communicated through basically nothing, and you get it all. Like, who are these people and what are they doing? You just understand everything without really anyone having to say much. And, Harrison Ford, he's a very confident on-screen presence. Again, it's a struggle to talk about movies like this.
My passion for this movie and my frustration with the comic book adaptation was so high that I spent the year of 1983 on my Passover vacation. I got a VHS copy of the movie, and I sat on my couch with a big thing of like chocolate pudding, the cheapest junk food I could find at the time. And I sat there and I drew every single edited shot of the movie because I was going to do the real adaptation of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was going to send it to Marvel, and then they were going to stop publishing what they were publishing, and they were going to stop the presses and publish mine. All right. Now I can't express to you enough how much I am not good, and I'm a little child, and I literally, every time there's an edit, I pause the movie and draw what's on screen. I drew 45 pages of comic book art. I never got out of the jungle. I don't think I even got into the cave because it's just like, it's just Indiana Jones walking through the jungle.
Right.
So yeah, but that's how formative it was to me. Like,
do you have this art somewhere?
Yes, I absolutely do.
Belongs in a museum.
It absolutely doesn't.
You saying, you're talking about the things like the trading cards and the comics adaptation, like them taking this movie and splitting it only into 2 issues. You're like, this opening sequence is an entire issue. Things like the trading cards, you're like, it would take 100 sequential trading cards to get through the beats of just the opening. It is like an entire movie. It's a mini movie in and of itself. It has, like, how many shots are in the first 10 fucking minutes of this?
Just like indelible history of cinema
But
shots.
I'm saying the pure number of shots.
No, you're right.
It's both. It's that every shot is like a deliberate, like diamond cut, perfect, evocative, communicative, exciting, thrilling, kind of meaningful image with like these perfectly timed edits. You watch a big action sequence in a movie today, you might have as many shots and as many cuts, but it's just 20 meaningless kind of setups of like multiple cameras filming the action from multiple angles, and then it's sort of edited in whatever mishmash way. And you're like, no, these are like 60 deliberate different setups that all are like telling you something very specific from where the camera is relative to the action and where the action is and the screen direction and all of this fucking shit. It is like a sequence. The whole movie is like this, but this sequence in particular is like every single shot is moving the story forward in like a very deliberate way and in a way you could not have done in the previous shot. Even sometimes when it feels like the shift of angle is marginal, when the action plays out, you're like, that's why the camera had to be here rather than there.
He's good at that stuff.
He's
old Stevie.
Pretty fucking good at it. He has the best innate brain for that, maybe of anyone who's ever lived.
Yes, he does.
The one influence I was not aware of at the time, but I came aware of like more recently, was how important Chuck Jones was to Steven Spielberg at the time, and it's clearly like all over 1941 in a real, that is a Chuck Jones cartoon trying to come to life, whereas this one has the influence of Chuck Jones's mousetrap like storytelling being produced towards a narrative that deserves it. It's quite an interesting kind of magic trick on its own that would be amongst all the John Ford and other influences. There's like a Chuck Jones bit of business every time he's kind of setting up his shots or laying out how he's going to make his action.
Who's Chuck Jones?
Chuck Jones.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just
Looney
asking.
Tunes.
Oh, of course. I'm just asking, though, again, on behalf of the audience who may not know.
He's kind of...
No, I appreciate that, Ben. And also, if there's a book that came out recently called Spielberg, The First 10 Years, and in it, they dive a little harder than I'd ever seen about how Spielberg and Chuck Jones were just hanging out together. Like they were having lunch and getting together.
Spielberg was one of the people who was really working hard to elevate Chuck Jones in the public's eye to like, this is living legend, like master of the form for the last couple decades of his life.
The other thing, and speaking to what you were saying, Griffin, is like Spielberg proudly says they shot this film in 73 days, which is, very, very short shooting schedule for a movie this epic. They would shoot just 3 or 4 takes, like not like 40 takes, because he storyboarded very precisely, which is a Spielberg trademark. But really, he's like, really for this one, they were the fallbacks in my previous movies, but for this movie, it was like really to stay on schedule and to stay to exactly what I'd
It was an
conceived.
exercise in self-discipline for him. He needed to prove to himself that he could do it.
So it's kind of a live action animated vibe, right? Like it's like we've already drawn what's supposed to happen. Now there are things, of course, that change, such as the famous fight with the swordsman, which just turns into Indy shooting him, versus like the whip versus sword duel.
Because everyone had diarrhea.
Because everyone had, these are the stories where it's like they became IMDb lore
but
that
this
everybody
perfect
recites.
Combination of things being so perfectly worked out in advance and then inspiration hitting and things changing and evolving on the fly. I mean, Chuck Jones, Ben, I feel like is kind of credited as being like the real father of Bugs Bunny, but also was like the main architect of the Roadrunner Wile E. Coyote shorts, which I feel like have a lot of influence on this. And the philosophy that's talked about a lot about with animation, but in particular, all the like Termite Terrace, Looney Tunes animators, was like the importance of anticipation and how to visually sort of indicate to the audience what the character thinks is going to happen, what they're thinking, what they're trying to do, so that you can subvert the expectation and have the comedy of what goes wrong. Wile E. Coyote running off the cliff, staying suspended in the air, looking down, recognizing he's standing in the air, and then he like falls. Things like that, where it's like that's being conveyed wordlessly. That's why the like Wile E. Coyote thing, I feel like has a big influence on this. Where so often, despite the fact that Indiana Jones has like 40 of the most quotable lines in film history in this one movie, many of his biggest sequences, he's kind of moving through wordlessly.
Yeah, absolutely.
It needs to play out in his face. It needs to play out in his action. It's the beauty of even just like the power of the sandbag thing, right? Of just this moment of him like relishing the idol, walking towards it, the golden glow on his face, taking out the sandbag, holding the 2 in his hand, weighing it, pouring a little bit out. And you're like, that's a kind of complicated idea that is being conveyed to us in like 15 seconds. okay, this is like a pressure trap. It's a weight trap. He needs to substitute it with something of equal weight. He does it. He thinks he gets away. It's wrong. The thing starts to slide down. The ground shakes.
It's all such beautiful nonsense.
Yes, but that's
Just
this
so
is
great.
where I'm very jealous of you, Brian. Is I'm just like, I probably knew Indiana Jones as the guy who runs away from the boulder.
You
That
don't
was
know the
how it was
boulder's gonna
introduced to me.
come.
I
Yeah.
cannot imagine sitting in the fucking theater and being like, already this movie's done so much. The temple idol pedestal starts to go down. You're like, what's gonna go wrong now? No one could have fucking anticipated it was the biggest boulder you've ever seen.
Perfectly round boulder.
Right, a thing that must have felt like impossible that this could even be depicted on camera.
And these things are so cliche now and so part of film history about even snakes, I hate them, like screaming laughter in the theater. Like the first time that joke is told, the first time you see him lose his shit, he loses his cool.
Because he's kept his shit together through all this insane shit for like 10 minutes, and then the snakes cause him to have a panic attack.
Right. One snake.
Yeah, it's the delight is through the roof. It's incredible to even, we're feeling it 50 years later. You can still feel the embers of the joke. Hey Ben, I'm a big fan of Ben and his taste. Ben, what was your relation? Have you seen this before?
And that's a true good guest. Bringing Ben in.
Oh yeah,
specifically.
No. I was really curious what your relationship to all of this is.
I am a big fan of Indiana Jones.
Have you always been since childhood?
Yep.
Yeah,
for sure.
I mean,
it was something I feel like I'd catch middle of the day on the weekend playing on cable TV. I had to watch it, Also, I played
the video games,
the computer games.
Yes.
Yeah,
they're
the Atlantis
so
one in
good.
particular. I love that game.
but also he's dusty. He dresses well.
Yeah, he goes into
He's got
pits.
cool
He's finding
fits.
bones.
Yeah.
He's stealing treasure.
He's just he's such an amalgamation of all of these characteristics in this incredible way.
Yeah.
He's kind of a bad boy, but he's smart.
Mhm.
He gets
He's
down
also an
and dirty.
egghead, right? Like that's the weird. I
Yeah.
just can't get over it. Every time I rewatch this,
You love the cut to the university.
yeah,
That's
you're
your
just
thing.
this is when the movie should fall apart. You almost feel like the legacy of this movie should be greatest opening sequence of all time, and then they fuck it up.
It's literally the greatest exposition scene in the history of exposition scenes. It's an incredible scene.
But it's such an insane change of pitch that it's wild that it keeps the momentum.
But I would say for me, origin-wise, this is major bone core.
Oh, sure.
Yes.
There's just bones all over this franchise.
You're right. It's a bone heavy world.
And he uses it as a torch.
Yep.
It's a comedic device when, a bunch of rattling bones come out of nowhere. I love that. That's such a fun element.
It's just so fun to consider this academic being well, I'm going to go find this Peruvian idol. Where is it? It's in this video game level,
right?
Cave, where it's you have to do 8 traps and dodge the spikes and solve the puzzle and all that. And as a kid watching this movie, I'm just yeah, the people who build these, of course, this is part of ancient lore.
But also, we were
because I've been playing Super Mario my whole life.
Yes,
But
also, we were born into a post Indiana Jones world where you're oh, I get it. He's an Indiana Jones type.
True.
Versus this movie creating a thing that is when you break it down into the elements of even how Lucas pitched it to him, it's wild that it was so fully formed because it is an odd idea. And it's odd that it's not there's such an obvious instinct, I would imagine, to make it into a Clark Kent Superman thing that you're oh, Professor Jones is the cover. Is his boring sort of front for his real adventuring.
Right.
But
instead it's
he's a nervous professor who gets thrown into these situations and he's in over his head and he doesn't like exploring.
No, instead it's US, intelligence comes to him and is look, Hitler wants the Ark of the Covenant. We figure you're the guy to figure that one out. He's a known adventurer.
But to your point about being the greatest exposition in cinematic history, right? The fact that you watch him spin that blackboard and start to break down in chalk the history, giving them the fucking backstory, right? like just dropping his bona fides and his theories. And he gets his rocks off as much doing that as he does successfully outrunning a boulder. They are both equally exciting to him. He plays them differently.
But then so he goes, all right, to move the story along, and then he goes to Nepal in search of
really moving along.
No, I am not
We
really
should
moving it along.
mention-
What?
Belloc!
No, we haven't met him yet.
Excuse me, he's the one who takes the fucking fertility idol!
Oh, Belloc.
Hey,
sorry,
hey.
Not Belloc. I thought
Saleh?
you meant Saleh. Right
No,
now.
we'll get to Saleh.
Belloc's there.
Yeah.
We'll get back to Belloc.
Brian's laughing.
I mean, if you
He's
want,
happy that he got to see
if you wanted
us
me
yell at each
to
other.
tell you who they wanted for the part of Belloc,
Sure.
Spielberg wanted Jacques Dutronc, who's a French actor. He really wanted this character.
That guy's French?
Well, let me tell you. Do you think this guy looks French to you? Jacques Dutronc. Don't.
I'm seeing here his second choice for the role was Croque Monsieur. Croissant du fromage.
A French
These
musician.
are real names. These were beloved actors at the time.
But I guess he had played Van Gogh.
Coq au vin.
Pepe Le
I don't know.
Pew?
Anyway, he's busy. But
He was busy smoking a cigarette.
right. Spielberg really
Buying
wanted
a
the
baguette.
character to be played by a Frenchman.
Yes.
Paul Freeman enters late. They've already thought about Giancarlo Giannini, which is a fun idea.
Yeah.
And Spielberg just liked his eyes. Said he has the champagne villain from a film noir vibe.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's like this isn't a tough guy exactly. He's like a smart, mean guy, and like whatever. Good
I
casting.
also like the villain that's handsome in his own way. Like he's equally handsome. to
Different
Harrison
kind
Ford,
of handsome.
If
You're right.
that's your type.
Yeah, he could be a leading man in a different movie. I also,
Yep.
it's funny, I always go like, it's wild that he's still alive.
Paul
Because
Freeman?
he
Yeah.
plays so much older in my mind watching this movie than he actually was at the time, where I think Ford is 2 years older than him.
They're roughly the same age.
Right, and
Yeah,
it feels
they're
like
14 year
Belloc is
older.
like 15 years older than Indy.
He does feel a little bit patronizing. I guess
Right.
that's why.
Which
right?
is something he's successfully sung as an actor. I think it's also the fact that Belloc's a little more hands-off, right?
Yeah, and Belloc it's a perfect villain because he's
Yeah.
like, he's smart, like Indy's smart,
Mhm.
but he sells to the highest bidder,
Right.
clearly.
He has no
And
scruples.
he's unscrupulous.
Yes.
That's very true.
Yeah.
And he like you say, like doesn't get his hands dirty like Indy does. Indy's got, dirt under his fingers.
But that's what's so frustrating is Indiana Jones can go through this whole fucking adventure, roll out by the skin of his teeth, hat intact, right?
right.
And be like, oh my God, what a thrilling set piece. And Belloc is just standing there and he's like, I'll take that.
Thank you.
Right. That Belloc just is able to stay one step ahead of him while avoiding the trials and tribulations that Indy had to go through.
He's also wearing the uniform of an explorer, Belloc.
Yes.
But he's
Sure.
not dirty at
Not
all.
dirty.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
Like it's like
Mhm.
clearly he's
I mean,
like
he looks good.
An immaculate,
great.
like, white suit. Yes.
But
His cream.
it's
yeah,
like he's
yeah.
trying too hard to fit the part, whereas Indy is just fashion wise, I mean, one of the best looks of all time.
it's really interesting how the
It's
villains
so simple too.
Like, I feel like the villains of every indie movie are not really famous actors until I guess you get to like Kate Blanchett. By the time we're doing the new ones where it's like, well, everyone wants to be.
When they announced that Kate Blanchett was going to be in Crystal Skull,
Right.
I was like, well, she must be playing the new love interest
Right.
because it feels weird for a franchise that never has out and out movie stars as like
Right,
even
they
Mads
would get these
Mikkelsen feels
interests
too
a little
well known in that type.
Well, I love Mads Mikkelsen.
I do
but
too.
his lazy casting as a villain these
Right.
days. Like, but right, like Amrish Puri and then like Last Crusade. Who would who's the biggest? villain?
it's,
like Allison Duty and
No, but it's why am I forgetting his name now? Your favorite from Empire.
I do love him, Julian Glover.
Julian
Yes,
Glover is
right.
the
But
main
again,
villain
like,
of that movie.
These are character
Yes.
actor guys.
Yeah,
Like,
as a
these-
guy
yeah.
who Lucas liked was like, you're
Right.
a good stuffed shirt. Like,
right.
But
And that's what
yes.
Paul Freeman is, and he's excellent. Like
But it's
yeah.
also part of the Indiana Jones structure where it's like you have these secondary, like third villains. You have like, boss level villains. There's an overarching guy who you're fighting against in sort of like almost a conceptual battle. But the actual action sequences don't happen with that person, which is, I feel like, another mistake modern movies tend to make is like they want the Belloc to also be the best fighter in the world. And you're like, no, that's two separate guys. Belloc sends someone else out to punch Indy.
And we in this time frame of James Bond, Jaws is Richard Kiel, right? That's his the actor's name is Jaws, and that is an iconic villain that goes like that is referenced in every variety show of the time. That's also part of the Lucas and Spielberg, is that there's always these weird variety hours that would do sketches about Star Wars or Indiana Jones and James Bond, and so Richard Kiel would show up as Jaws. So when you're watching Raiders and the burly Nazis are they're boxing right outside the plane, that's a Jaws scene. Like that's a flat out James Bond Jaws scene.
Right, but it's like, I mean, it's always the example I throw out, but like that's a clear thing they lifted from James Bond very wisely, right?
Yes.
Of like, there's a guy who they're trying to track down, who is the man in the lair, who is going to monologue.
Right, the guy who'll talk to them and wear a suit and serve them dinner.
And that guy will give like an A-class performance. And then you're going to have some weird looking guys with gimmicks who create like different sort of like battle puzzles for Indiana Jones to get through. Versus I always think of Quantum of Solace, where at the end, James Bond has to fight Mathieu Almeric. And I'm like, well, this fight is over.
Well, there is a big general guy that he fights. Well, no, it's still good. Kurosawa fights him. We'll do Quantum of Solace one day. Very interesting movie. I defend it. I will, Brian. Thank you. Do you like Quantum of Solace, or are you anti-Quantum of Solace?
I am such a big Casino Royale fan that it's hard to wrap my head fully around Quantum, but it is a part of Casino Royale, so it's hard to let it go as well.
Yes, it's like one of those. Right, nasty little.
I don't hate it, but much like nothing's Force Awakens except for Force Awakens, same thing with Casino Royale.
I think of it as the Temple of Doom to Casino Royale's Raiders of the Lost Ark in like sort of complementary.
Maybe I bump on them in similar ways for similar reasons.
But okay, so then they go to meet Marion. We have to talk about Marion Ravenwood, played by Karen Allen.
Yes.
Obviously, they're looking for Arthur Ravenwood, or what the fuck his name is. What's the dad's name?
Abner Ravenwood.
Abner Ravenwood, right. But he's dead. Mm-hmm. And his daughter is running the bar in his stead in Nepal, and she's got this medallion, and, off we go. But what do we think of Karen Allen?
This is an incredible performance of the highest order. It doesn't get enough credit to this day. It's just...
Even though the franchise eventually acknowledged, she was always the one with these later movies.
Right.
Yes.
We were kind of
still
foolish
doesn't get enough credit
for trying to do anything else.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And if I get that's the James Bond lesson they did wrong, I think, which is he gets a new lady friend every thing. And also a lot of people feel like, Marion Ravenwood is one of the great characters of cinema, and then followed by Willie Scott, who isn't.
I would agree.
Screaming and yelling, just screaming at the top of her lungs the whole movie, which is not anywhere near as interesting as what Marion brings to the table.
Well, it's like they wanted to make the anti-Marion to have fun with the flip side of it, but the anti-Marion means you're doing the opposite of what works.
Right, exactly. Marion's a good character,
right?
So the anti-Marion would be a bad
switch, and they made one bad choice. Yeah.
So watching the making of that I sent you that aired on television, there was two takeaways that were amazing. Number one, that she basically says, I think she's one of the first people to say, she says as nicely as you could possibly say it, but she's basically saying, I'm doing everything he's doing, but in heels and backwards, right? And she absolutely is. And also that she would come to Spielberg with bigger ideas that he would take very seriously, including, I don't think I knew until recently that the scene between her and Belloc, drinking each other under the table, was improv. They went off to the side, improv the scene, put it together, and gave it to Spielberg. Here's what we worked out, because I want to wear this dress, and I want to do this for the rest of the movie. And they went off and improved and came back, and he accepted it and changed the course of the movie in a positive way. So she has authored her character in a way that few actors, particularly in a movie like this, get to do. And that's amazing.
It's a thing with Spielberg I find so fascinating is most filmmakers who are this precise in their craft have a tendency to go towards the sort of Hitchcock, you are a model. I am telling you what to do. You have to hit, especially because it's just with Spielberg, it's if you step an inch off, the shot's not going to work, right? The timing needs to be hair precise. And yet it feels like he's very collaborative. It never feels like he is boxing his actors in.
Mhm.
There's this weird dance between the visual language feeling so rigid in a certain sense, and yet the performance is feeling very fluid and organic in between. And even like Marion's introduction, this long oneer of the drinking contest in the bar in Nepal, where the camera is just kind of slowly moving back and forth between the two of them. It's really unshowy. The unconscious effect of it is knowing that you're watching this in real time without cuts, that you're seeing these shots being taken, even though it's probably fucking water or whatever, right? But it's like such a perfect, wordless, like drinking this guy under the table, walking off, kicking everyone out of the bar, and immediately being like, she's not even like tipsy.
Right. And she's also, I mean, she's a tiny little firecracker.
So this is the other part of this character, is that it feels like her first fight with Indiana Jones is also like, how dare you did this to me? And then you fucking walk out of my life, and then you come back like nothing happened, and you want my fucking help on one of your stupid fucking adventures, you and my dad, right? There is this whole feeling of this woman who is like, yeah, look, I'm this like cool badass lady who like beats tough guys in drinking contests and runs a bar and doesn't take any guff. It's like not by choice. It's on affectation. I was basically deprived of having a normal childhood.
Right. I was raised this way. I mean,
I was raised this way. My like first romance was a guy who was my father's protege, who was trying to be my dad and pulled me even deeper into this shit.
to give you some Karen Allen news.
Please.
News? No, we got dossier stuff, background. Spielberg had noticed her in Animal House, where she's Peter Riker's
And we all
girlfriend,
did.
right?
She really stood out in a great way. Like, as you're better than all of this. Yeah.
Like she's like a Carol Lombard. She's like an Irene Dunn, like one of these sort of like 30s like heroines with like a big chip on her shoulder, right? Natural fit. Karen Allen says some of the people who tested that she heard about Deborah Winger, Sean Young, as previously mentioned, Barbara Hershey. Karen Allen auditioned with John Shea, Lex Luthor himself, from the 90s, Lois and Clark.
Yeah.
And he was in Mutant X. Remember John Shea?
Remember
John
Mutant
Shea?
X? Yeah.
And then she did a screen test with Tim Matheson. And it was always the bar. It was always the bar. Like that's what she's doing. And she said she just loved the character, reminded her again of all those firecracker, broads from the 30s and 40s, right? And a character that she felt had kind of vanished from movies, right? Like that's an old kind of female lead. Like in the 50s and 60s, that kind of character had gone away. I guess you have like Katharine Hepburn.
Yeah, Katharine Hepburn. Yeah.
She plays the sadness of the character. Like it's the thing I think that causes people to like get up in arms and like
cancel Indy.
No, I was gonna say when people complain about fucking like Mary Sue characters, right?
Sure.
When they push back on this idea of like, oh, so now I'm supposed to believe that this woman who's smaller than everyone is tougher and a better fighter and smarter and funnier and prettier and all this sort of stuff. I think a lot of it is like people trying to recapture this character.
Right.
And Karen Allen correctly, I think, figures out how to dramatize all of her behavior being a bit of a defensive posture and like learned survival instincts, rather than it feeling like, I don't know, just a show,
She says she went to Spielberg and said, I have a whole history for this character. I think I was in this romance with Indy when she was 16 years old. Like she also is doing this stuff. And Spielberg apparently looked at her and was like, that's an entirely different movie. We're not doing that. Like clearly, like Lucas and her are both kind of like, what if there's this twisted backstory? Spielberg's like, I'm making an adventure movie. It doesn't matter. Like, stop.
But it's under the hood.
It's a little bit under the hood.
It's a perfect amount of spice, though. It's a perfect.
Karen Allen's
exactly what he needs.
Right. Her ultimate take is like, I think she had a crush on him. Like, maybe there was a flirtation or whatever when she was like essentially a late teenager. I don't think this was some major romance. Like, she thinks that's like the movie sort of take on Marion and Indy, not something like more darker and whatever.
But there's like this version of it's obviously far less tragic, right? But like I think about the end of True Grit, where like the poignancy of that story is like, oh, this girl kind of never gets over this. right? Like she's this tough, flinty little girl, and everyone thinks it's kind of cute and funny. And
Right,
she
by the
goes on
time
this
she's
wild
an adult,
adventure.
right? It's clear that she's very tough to interact with because she's such a tough, flinty woman. With
Right.
one arm.
And Marion's got like a version of that where you're like, how many fucking adventures was she dragged along to between these two men in her life who were such like important figures in her development?
But
if you want to see Spielberg direct the scene in the bar, it's in the doc. I put on my social media because it's an incredible bit of watching him direct. Just the wonder of her putting the shot glasses down and him getting the crowd to do what they need to do and react accordingly.
That was another
wonderful
thing
direction.
I was looking at Juror Number 2, a film that we both love. Have you seen, Brian?
I have not seen it, but I will.
It's very good. Clint Eastwood, famous for doing maybe half a take.
One and a half takes, right, is him having a long day.
Right. Yes. A thing I noticed watching this movie that I want to be clear, I like a tremendous amount. But now Clint Eastwood filming digitally, it's a little brighter. You can see everything. I kept in multiple sequences noticing how bad the background actors were. And it is a thing that I'm not putting on the background actors.
No, but it's the problem of these Clint movies, these late Clint movies, where it's like people really have to come correct. Because it doesn't take very long. Right?
And I think the principal cast of this entire movie of Juror is doing that. But like background actors are a thing that are hard to dial in because it's like a complicated machinery. They haven't read the fucking script. They're showing up. A first AD is like, so basically what's going on in this scene, they're wearing costumes that they got 5 minutes ago. It's hard to get everyone synchronized on the same page. That fucking drinking contest where there's like 10 people over each of their shoulders. And you can tell it's a combination of like stunt guys, character actors, and people who seem like non-professional actors. And all of them are immaculate. And there's no editing wiggle room. This whole thing has to play out in one shot. When the camera pans over from one to the other, the people in the background need to be doing the right thing. And I like rewound it 5 times. And I was like, no one's doing too much and no one's doing too little. There isn't anyone who looks checked out or distracted, but there's also the opposite of people being like, yeah, Marion, go Marion, and making like huge faces. And this whole movie is like that. And that's the shit that's like astonishing for me, is he's just able to get everything in the frame correct, you know? And then even down to like the Indiana Jones silhouette, you know, appearing on the wall after Marion kicks everyone out of the bar. I feel like the story with that is that because the shadow would actually be going in the opposite direction logically.
Sure, but it doesn't, like they're messing with
that he's like walking backwards. He's starting closer to her, backlit, and then moving further away.
Okay, sure.
Because if you get closer and closer to a shadow, your shadow gets smaller.
Shrinks, yes, right.
Or the opposite way.
Well, it depends on where the lights, whatever.
But it's like, that's a moment where Spielberg has this idea of this clear, like impactful, iconic shot. A lot of filmmakers would get so caught up with trying to capture that image that the Karen Allen performance part of it would be secondary. But that's the most important part, is how beautifully she plays that moment of dropping the glasses and immediately being kind of like astonished, emotionally overwhelmed, furious, and then going up to him and slapping him in the face. And it's like, here's the whole dynamic already.
It's true. It's all you need. You're on board with it right away. And he never really gets it with any other character in the sequels. Yeah, the romantic.
Well, I think Willie Scott doesn't work, and Allison Doody is kind of like a misdirect.
Yeah,
Allison Doody's. No, I think she's good, but fun. I think that character is like a kind of
thing.
Wrong footing. And I think the thing that Last Crusade gets right is that like Indiana Jones needs a sparring partner. They just make it his dad instead of a love interest, because I think they know they're not going to beat Marion on the third one. It's not worth trying a third woman.
And a winning thing for Crystal Skull for me is when she comes back into it, she comes in as clearly this woman has never had a break, and as now has a glorious agent of chaos. So she is and to get to the Jewish coding again, I feel with Marion as well, but there is in Crystal Skull, she definitely has that Jewish mother energy of get in the car, we're leaving. Like this is like, and I just adore it tremendously. And there's a joy of her performance in Crystal Skull. Like she is deeply happy to be back and deeply happy to revisit this character at this age. And she's shining with it. It just makes the movie a lot of fun to watch.
I feel like we adore her. Animal House was a movie I was shown way too young. For how overprotective my parents were, my dad basically, like at like maybe 6, showed it to me as if it was Talmudic. It was like, you must understand this. So she like loomed very large in my childhood of, I feel like, one of my first on-screen crushes. And as you said, I think generationally, especially for people who were alive at that time, that character, like, even though she's not in that much of the movie, she is just like kind of so captivating. And there is just some sort of like inner life and sort of like, there's a sense of self she has that is very fixed. And her like weird balance of like, how much bullshit she will tolerate versus when she puts her foot down, which is the stuff that they're like really weaponizing very well in this film. You know, the Willie Scott problem is like Indiana Jones can't have a sidekick who doesn't want to be in the movie. And they try this with Mutt and Wombat as well, which is like he needs someone who is his equal, but has a different thought process on how they should be handling things. They both need to be trying to drive the story, but with different approaches. And Marion's just the perfect example of that, where like, and it's just structurally very beautifully built about when she falls out of the movie and when she comes back, when he thinks she's dead, when he finds her in Belloc's tent but leaves her there. The sort of like, anytime she's not on screen, you're going, where's Marion? When's Marion coming back?
By the way, opening weekend, 13 years old, Marion dies. Totally believed it. Oh my God, they killed her.
I feel like I would.
They killed her. Yeah, totally fell for it. Also, when you watch the documentaries, of which I rewatched everything in preparation for this, Spielberg is so head over heels in love with Kate Capshaw as he should be in the making of that. It is distracting them. It is 100%. He literally, the end of that documentary, he goes, Indiana Jones didn't get the girl, I did. He literally looks in the camera and says those words. So that's where his head is at when this movie is being made.
So Marion and Indy go to Cairo. They meet Saleh. So it's something you probably know about.
We have your introduction of Toad, who I will say...
Oh, in the who rocks.
Is my favorite character.
Of course it is. He feels...
Ideologically, I like his...
Ronald Lacey, in this movie especially, just looks like a puppet to me. It looks like they made him. Now, obviously, maybe that's partly because his face melts at the end in this way that,
but I think
like, you're like, yeah, he was always a puppet. They melted him at the end.
Created by Aardman. He is a plasticine man.
It just, he's so good in every scene, but he always, you're just kind of like, this is like a fake person.
There's something uncanny.
There's an alien
in
his head working the levers.
I find him very captivating. Spielberg infamously wanted Klaus Kinski and couldn't get him to agree. That would completely have unbalanced this movie.
Might be fun.
Imagine?
I mean, beyond like, this sounds like a production that didn't have the room for error to allow a Klaus Kinski into the ecosystem.
Right.
The damage he would have wrought behind the
everyone's
scenes.
pooping their guts out already.
But I'm also like, his performance would have been very overcranked, I imagine. That would have been fun in its own way. But there's something about Ronald Lacey kind of like never tipping over.
But instead of the documentary airing on CBS on primetime, it would have aired at Cannes.
Yes.
Spielberg said, I thought he had Peter Lorre vibes, which I think is right. And just like kind of perfect weird look. And, the three guys who get melted at the end, right? It is this perfect triumvirate of villainy of like, Belloc, this sort of cool, erudite. It's not even ideology for him. He's really just in it for the money, right? Then the big
lack of ideology,
right? The big statuesque Nazi guy, where you're just like, can't wait just to watch this guy. And then the weird little creep Nazi guy who's like, I'm reading maps. I want Hitler to have arc power,
and seems to maybe have some weird psychosexual thing going on. But much like a lot of other areas of the movie, it's done just the right amount, not really like delved into.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally, we meet him. But we can go to Cairo. Saleh, you know who was supposed to play Saleh, right?
Danny DeVito. He was supposed to basically be like a cantina creature from Star Wars, right? Like this fun little guy. And DeVito drops out late. I'm not sure why.
And because we kind of get to see him play the character in Romancing the Stone, it's weird to like
to imagine
we can see it. I still can't see it. Like I'm a huge Danny DeVito fan, a huge fan, and grew up with him my whole life, and I cannot see that.
It's another thing that feels like it would unbalance the movie.
I think so.
Where
I
you're
don't
like,
think it would work.
I don't think the movie benefits from Saleh being funnier. I'm sure if Danny DeVito were in this movie, every single second on screen would be funny. but does that help the film holistically, which is this sort of balance thing that Spielberg has such good instincts for at this point in time. I think especially after 1941, where he is like, maybe I don't have the handle on comedy I thought I did. Maybe I really need to like be deliberate about this. It's just so funny that like, in the same way that it's weird that Paul Freeman plays Belloc, whose thing is like hoity-toity Frenchman, you cast John Rhys-Davies as Saleh.
Well, this is the thing. They send him the script, and John Rhys-Davies is like, I am not a 5'2" Egyptian guy.
Right.
What are you thinking here? And Spielberg is basically like, I loved you in Shogun. He plays, the drunk Portuguese guy or Spanish guy in Shogun. The Nestor Carbonell played him in the new version beautifully. I want you to do something like that mixed with like Falstaff or whatever. And John Rhys-Davies is like, well, of course I can do that.
Which I think it's just like, even if it doesn't make sense as casting on paper, Spielberg understands what that character needs to accomplish, which is exposition sounds pretty fucking good coming out of his mouth, right? Like just the actual register of his voice, this sort of like classically trained, he can make anything sound like poetry.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he needs to be this sort of like high impact support with this sense of joy and this sort of like devilish, sort of like mischievous quality. But also it's like he needs to be able to relay the 3 lines that explain what's going to happen for the next 10 minutes of the movie and keep you interested.
Right.
Yeah. And from the time he's there helping, every joke lands. Every line read is perfect. In fact, when I was trying to imagine how you were going to open this episode, I literally thought it was podcast, very dangerous. You go first, is where I thought you were going.
Oh, I probably would have done an even worse job with that impression. His voice is just astonishing.
It's incredible. It's incredible in Dial of Destiny as well. It hasn't lost a beat.
It's another thing that Temple of Doom is missing is Saleh.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we
brushed over Brody entirely.
We brushed over Brody. Yeah, you're right, because Brody's there from the beginning and he's so good.
Yeah.
And
Denholm Elliott was nominated for Best Supporting Actor
BAFTA
at the BAFTAs.
Right. That's probably partly the Brits love this guy kind of thing.
I was just looking at this. Denholm Elliott won 3 consecutive Supporting Actor BAFTAs.
Right. So there you go.
After this.
Okay.
I think he maybe had 1 nomination before this. He wins for Trading Places.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then he wins for 2 other movies, British movies I didn't even know of.
Okay, let me see. Denholm Elliott BAFTA.
Well, just while you're looking it up, if I can be professorial for a second, there's some things in the screenplay that are just undeniably perfect, and one of them is the fact that Denholm Elliott, like the only time we're ever in Indiana Jones's house for 25 years is the scene where he comes over and goes, "Hey, don't do this. Just this is everything wrong, everything bad. I'm getting the creeps." And then you get to see Indiana Jones just blow him off. And it's one of a series of scenes where people keep pulling him aside. And we, the audience, are the only person that also knows that everyone has warned him, don't do this.
Yes.
The good guys, the bad guys, everyone's saying, don't go down this road. And he can't help himself, which I found it's an incredible bit of business. So, and that's following that great exposition scene where not only are we getting all the information we need for the movie, but we're getting Indiana Jones's perception of it and his take on it and his relationship to it. And that's what's often missing from exposition scenes in any kind of storytelling is, okay, we need this information, of course, please, but what's your hot take on it? Why you? Why am I hearing this from you? And what are you not telling me? Or what are you blowing off? And all of that is just exceptional writing.
Characterization getting lost in exposition, which is what leads to scenes that feel like homework, where you're like, okay, and when does the movie start? Versus having the perspective in the exposition of the character reacting to what they're finding out, and it's telling you things about them that are going to come in helpful later in your processing of the movie. Because, I mean, Brody, it's like, okay, here's this weird, like, guy who finances his expeditions, clearly has this kind of, like, boyish glee at the idea that not only are they acquiring these objects and, like, protecting them in the right context where they should belong, putting them in a museum, whatever, right? But also that he kind of loves hearing Indiana Jones report back and tell him the crazy shit he got up to. He never wants to do that. He loves that that's part of the equation.
But he's not about to fly to Peru and whatever.
But you have like this really beautiful, very quick, sort of like 3-scene arc of Brody being excited to hear what his expedition was like. Oh no, Bellic took it from you at the last second. That's a bummer, right?
And
then
the only friend Indiana Jones has that could really appreciate
Yes.
all that went into this is his friend Brody,
who he can really share this with. Then you have like
Yep.
Porkins and his partner show up, right? Here's a new potential assignment. You're watching Brody process the information as well at the same time. And then, as you said, followed by him visiting Indiana Jones at home and being like, okay, but seriously, don't do this.
Jack Porkins.
Also,
Right.
you can pack a gun. Back in those days, you couldn't pack
Yeah.
a gun in your
Yeah,
suitcase.
you could get it through TSA. Now you can't even pack toothpaste.
But also Porkins, his relationship to it. They literally come to Indiana Jones and go, "Hey, what do you know?" And he goes, "Well, I know this exact information." And the guy goes, "Whoa, Jesus Christ!" And like that, I never seen that in a movie before. Like, well, why are you asking him if you're not going to believe him? Yeah, it's everything about the scene is wonderful.
He lost the BAFTA to Ian Holm for Chariots of Fire, which of course is the best picture winner that
Okay,
year.
makes sense.
And then he gets BAFTA wins after this for Trading Places, which he's
Amazing.
incredibly funny in, obviously. And then, yes, A Private Function, which is like an Alan Bennett, famous British dramatist, like dramedy with Michael Palin, and Defense of the Realm, which is this kind of like dark British political thriller with Gabriel Byrne. Don't know what I should watch them.
Yeah.
I bet you he rocks in them,
But
but
he
it is
wins.
crazy that he won 3
That's
BAFTAs.
a good movie.
Yep.
Defense of the
Not
Realm
just
was a good movie.
Yep.
1-3 consecutive. It's 84,
Yep.
85,
And then he
86,
is nominated for Room with a View in 87. He
which
loses.
is his one Oscar nomination.
Right, which he's also amazing in.
This is a thing. You look through old BAFTA years, and now the BAFTAs like a mirror of the
Yeah, it's
Oscars too
boring.
closely, where it's
Yeah.
kind of boring. They used to just have such pride in their guys.
And
Yep.
it was a more British. There
That's
was
the thing.
not a lot of American movies making it. And if there is, it's
Right.
like Denholm Elliott and Raiders, where they're like, well, we like the British guy.
Right.
We like that British guy in that movie.
But then they also like Jamie Lee Curtis wins for Trading Places
yeah,
that
they
same
love
year.
Trading Places. It's,
Yeah.
it's kind of farcy in the way they probably did.
They just had interesting zags. But yes, to your point, like the fact that we're seeing the introduction of the arc as an idea through Brody as well as through Indy means that when Brody says you shouldn't do this, that hits differently for the audience, where you're like, this is the guy who likes Indiana Jones doing Indiana Jones shit. He's bankrolling it. He thinks it's fun. He likes hearing the stories. He's in favor. And he's saying this is one step too far, which is basically the introduction of like, there are forces at play that are maybe beyond your comprehension. This is like touching on mystical shit that's a little scary. Maybe, which Indy's just like, what the fuck are you talking about? Yeah.
But he literally goes, the wrath of God or some shit, right? So by Billy Wilder rules, you are promising that we're going to see some wrath of God at the end of this movie. Or they put it there, you don't really think about it again. And then when the wrath of God starts coming, you're like, oh shit, we're there. We're going to God's coming. This is super exciting, because once you hit it, you're like, what am I looking at? And you remember, oh, they told us wrath of God. Oh shit. So it's deeply exciting.
I mean, obviously, right. But the weird thing about Indiana Jones that a zillion people have remarked on is, right, he probably didn't need to do anything, right?
Yes.
They were always going to open the ark and all get murdered by it.
Do you have thoughts on this, Brian?
And like this became, right, the sort of galaxy brain nerd take of like, Indy doesn't really even do much.
Well,
like,
it's like we watched this movie of Indiana Jones doing a bunch of shit, but the big question is, if you remove him from the narrative, does the outcome change at all?
Well, our perspective of the narrative changes.
Very much
so. In itself changes the narrative. So,
which I would say is kind of like the defining element of what makes an interesting lead character. This is what people get wrong, is they're like, oh, an interesting lead character is a character who does a lot of shit. They're impactful
like,
because they're high functioning and capable.
He makes the right kind of moral choice at the end of each of his movies. Like, right? Like Indy does.
But I think it's beyond that, where it's like, the lesson is you want to watch the movie that Indiana Jones is in.
Right,
the movie
right.
where he's not in it wouldn't be fun. You could watch these same events play out, even if they were unaffected, without this guy doing his
treasure
shit.
hunters. Yeah, no, it probably wouldn't be very fun.
But you see so many blockbuster movies that can't answer why the main character is the main character, right?
mm-hmm.
Where you're like, they're the main character because they decided that's the main character at the center of the story. It's not interesting to be telling that story from that character's perspective.
But isn't there also the argument that it's like when they open the ark, some kind of ancient magic creatures, whatever, comes out, and they look upon these Nazis and turn into demons and destroy them, and they do not destroy Indiana or Marion. It's not just because Indiana's closed his eyes. Isn't it also just like they know these spirits have rendered judgment, and they know that Indy and Marion are not, evil of heart as everyone else gathered is.
Well, that's the low level sort of like Inglourious Bastards version of like, this is me creating an alternate history where there is like some modicum of like a microcosm representation of a course correction of like there being a cosmic balance.
That's in perfect reference, is that like we're taking history and we're just little tweaks so we can have some fun with it. If you, I'll answer a question with a question. If you were tied to a pole with David, and there was the wrath of God was swirling around you, and David said, "Griffin, keep your eyes shut," would you be able to?
It's actually a good question.
This is what's tough, okay? I think I'm capable of keeping my eyes shut. If
Screaming and yelling and
but I'm commanding you.
If David's the one telling me to do it, the tone of voice is really going to make a difference.
Griffin, close your eyes.
There's a version of it in which I keep my eyes open just to rile him up.
I'm gonna look.
There was an essay by a guy, Matt Pomeroy, for Esquire, that was sort of like expanding on this whole, how is the movie's outcome affected? What changes if you remove Indiana Jones from Raiders? And I'm just gonna read the quick sort of summary of this. But he says, like, the argument is, if the major things that change if Indiana Jones is not in the movie is that Tote kills Marion probably right away.
Yes, right. She won't survive.
Right? Just at the bar. The Ark would have been flown to Germany on the plane because Indiana Jones wouldn't have stopped the German mechanic. And that means that the Ark goes straight to Hitler, opens up, and burns his face.
So maybe we lose some good pieces. We lose some heroes.
This is the interesting
Hitler gets
thing.
Burned up.
You're like, the main thing that Indiana Jones stops is the Ark from getting straight to Hitler, who probably wanted first right of refusal and cracking that bad boy open.
Right.
It's an interesting perspective, but and also there's a lot of talk about like the when we heard the line in Last Crusade of "it belongs in a museum," the ongoing joke, it was a great line of dialogue but then years later you go, wait, no, it doesn't. It does not belong in a museum. It belongs exactly where you're stealing it from. But in most of these movies, he is keeping it from bad guys who are taking it. Like they are going to take it. So that's it. He's like better in a museum or in a warehouse than in Hitler's.
That's the better part of the argument, is that the thing he stops from happening is it getting to Germany. Yeah. Right? It's and that like it never ends up in complete Nazi control.
Right. And Lord knows, whatever. Maybe they could have done something bad with it.
And Lucas had this thing about that the MacGuffin always has to go back where it was or disappear. It has like that he has said this out loud. And I always wrestle with that back and forth just from a storytelling point of view. And I'm like, okay, yeah, perfect ending for Raiders. And I do believe a perfect ending for Temple of Doom, because he returns them to the village. He does not bring them to the museum. And you got to get a sense that young Indiana Jones has learned a lesson, right, on some level. And then by the third one, it's the Grail, and the Grail is just going to go and, fall into the pit. So even though the joke of it belongs in a museum, and there's a comic book out right now called The Horizon Experiment by the guys that did The Good Asian, where it's like a flip side of Indiana Jones, whereas she's literally taking things out of museums and bringing them back to Great Adventure. It's a great idea. I wish I thought
that's
of it.
a good idea.
So, but
Streets of Cairo.
Right. To fill in the several action sequences in between the denouement and the bar. Which one is which? There's the car chase, which rocks. There's the
in the documentary. My favorite stuff about Cairo is these beautiful wide shots that look like timeless shots, and then you cut to Robert Watts, the famous producer, when I had to go down and yank every one of those TV antennas off of every rooftop, and they're like, "Oh, those poor people." I just thought they didn't have
Fucking with
antennas.
everyone's
And
television, right?
But it's so much part of the lore of this movie too that it's like 120 degrees and they all get like dysentery.
there's someone who didn't. I think it might be Spielberg, who like wasn't drinking the water. There's some anyway.
Yes.
Yes.
But like a movie that is already him trying to keep himself on rails, be controlled, be precise, starts getting like more and more. He's basically like throwing dead weight off of a plane with a dying engine, going like, how do we save like 10 minutes here?
Right. And obviously that's how you get the sword versus gun fight.
You know
just
this
being
story,
trimmed
right, Ben?
to- You know, when Indy shoots the guy, right? The guy's like got the sword and he's swinging around and he just shoots him. It's like
Sure.
the most badass moment in the. But that was supposed to be a big fight.
Oh,
And
There was
Harrison
a
Ford
fully
was sick.
choreographed, like extended set piece, Indy fighting this guy with a whip versus his sword. And they get there on the day and everyone is like shitting their pants. And Harrison Ford's like, what if I just shot him? What if he
It's
does
so
his whole
good.
big like show and then I just shoot him dead? Because of course he's got a gun. Why would he use the whip if he doesn't have to?
That's incredible.
Yeah. And it's like,
it's incredible.
it is this iconic moment that I feel like people try to replicate a lot. And a lot of times when other movies do something like this, it feels like it is an unsatisfying subversion that you are avoiding avoiding showing us the thing we want to see. I think there's something weirdly just in the like DNA of it being created in an organic way versus it being something that is reverse engineered. This is the problem with a lot of movies that try to be Indiana Jones, is they're looking at the end
Yeah, it's hard
results
to
and
fake
going,
it.
we need something like this. You need the swordsman moment. You need a character like Marion, and you're starting from like the final result surface level
Well,
elements.
Indiana Jones also just has so much action that like you don't miss whatever you're missing there because it's on to the next thing and we're running. You know, it's like Indiana Jones is 70% set pieces anyway. So it's fine.
And if you want to accuse Indiana Jones of doing anything wrong in the movie, is he has caused chaos throughout this village. I mean,
Yeah,
true.
he's just like, he has tipped over everyone's business. These are small businesses, and he is just causing chaos.
He is an unhelpful presence. That's true. And it's also that he can find treasure. Like, as much as I love Indiana Jones, he is looking for treasure.
But like talking about Chuck Jones influence, like Marion hiding in the barrels and it like having this like sequence of it almost becoming like 3-card Monty of like, where is she? Feels like a thing that Bugs Bunny does to like avoid Elmer Fudd. You know, like I feel like there are 10 shorts where he does a similar thing where he's like hiding in different jars and peeking his head out.
And the monkey giving her away, giving her up.
Yes.
Very funny.
The monkey Steven Spielberg grew up with in his house.
Right. And then you're just like, the relationship Marion has with the monkey in that brief amount of screen time feels so mirrored to his mother's relationship with the monkey, which also kind of makes sense in terms of like what you're saying about part of the Willie Scott problem being that Spielberg was so taken with Kate Capshaw that to a certain degree, maybe his judgment is out the window, right? I'm not saying that he wasn't noting her more because he was in love with her, but there are other considerations going on in his mind. He is so sort of like entranced by this woman's existence versus I think what helps Marion avoid ever feeling like some weird kind of like idealized little boy's fantasy of a tough girl who's also pretty and is cool and is funny, is that it does feel like to some degree she's like his mom, right? That like everything we now know about Spielberg's real mother from the Fablemans, but also the way he's talked about her, written about her, and being the sort of person who like refused to be boxed in life.
Flowy, poetic spirit who was being boxed in but was resisting.
And was like constantly pushing against it and acting out and causing trouble and all of that. It feels like he's pulling from a very personal experience of a woman he had a non-sexual relationship with.
You know who she had a sexual relationship with is Seth Rogen.
And she did in real life.
The Saleh of his family. But but also like I know it's just like little clips and stuff. It's almost not fair to even judge the whole relationships on the 4 seconds they show us in the documentary. But you can see in the Raiders doc, the ones made like the serious docs made about this, is that you can see them, the Karen Allen and Spielberg really working, like really like challenging each other in the best way possible. Whereas every clip of him and Kate Capshaw is very flirty and they're having a blast, and there's nothing creepy or weird going on, but they are absolutely falling in love with each other, and it's just a different vibe. It just is, yeah. And the best part in the stuff with Kate Capshaw is that she won't do the snake,
Right, that she's so
but it
scared
goes,
of everything. Yeah.
but you'll do the bugs. She
Right.
goes, okay, I'll do the bugs, and it cuts to the bug scene. It goes, you promised me bugs. Like they are very much in that space as a couple, right?
I would not do the bugs. I would do the snake.
I was surprised by her choice as well. I think she was just trying to get out of the day.
The Well of Souls, as you mentioned, is cut out of what, the comic book or the novelization? The comic book did not have the Well
I
of
believe,
Souls.
yeah, there's like that kind of chunk is cut out of it, but I
guess
don't
it's
want
the
to.
slowest chunk of the movie. It's the least kinetic part, but it's fun. It's fun puzzle stuff. I like puzzle stuff.
It's
You like
almost
puzzles?
archaeology.
Yeah.
Yes. And this is where it helps to have Saleh in this part of
Right.
the movie too, that you have this like bon vivant guy
Mm-hmm.
who, when indie is getting more academic, you can have
Yes.
Saleh be big.
Right. When
But even like Saleh, like trying to pull the like when they're really trying to lift the lid off the Well of Souls, like they're both, there's some tremendous shots there, one of which I've never seen someone strain that hard on camera before. Like I just like Saleh's like really looks like he's gonna pop something, and then there's a shot of Harrison Ford in an almost wild-eyed like mania, like he hasn't slept, it's gonna happen, and it's a very rare shot of him just almost like spiritually out of control. Like I must like, and it's what, not to rewind on you, but Belloc hits him with hey, you and I are the same guy, which is, by the way, for writers out there, never write that scene. It's been written. You don't have to write it. Please don't write it. Please, please, please. Even if you really feel like your villain and hero are two sides of the same coin,
you don't need someone to say it.
don't have anyone look at the camera and say it. But in this time, he does. He goes, "Yeah, you and I are the same guy. I don't even know why we're fighting. We're both looking for the same shit. We both feel the same way about this stuff." And then in that moment where Harrison Ford is wild-eyed to open the Well of Souls, you see that the villain is right. The villain that he is right. That Harrison Ford is built of the same stuff as this guy here. And when the moment's happening, he cannot stop himself. And that's great character stuff, particularly for an action movie.
There are movies like Sorcerer and The Abyss and The Thing, two of which we've covered.
And
Sorcerer
one
will
of which
probably
we
do one
will
day.
definitely
Right.
cover, yes.
Where you're like, part of the magic of this movie is you telling how fucking difficult it was to shoot.
Sure.
That those are movies that like
They're
successfully
straining. You can feel it. Yeah.
Right. And they successfully represent the extreme environmental conditions that the characters are in, which you also know the cast and crew were put through as well, and that it's not faked, and that like the tone of Kurt Russell's skin is a legitimate reaction to him actually being like in a fucking Arctic environment for that long. It is wild to me that Raiders in particular does not have that kind of weight to it, where I like, when I watch this movie,
It feels quite effortless.
it feels
Yes.
light and breezy. And then
Yeah.
every 10 minutes, I think like, Jesus fucking Christ. This must have been the most exhausting gauntlet in the world. It is nonstop action in like very inhospitable climates and terrains and just all the things you know about like how rushed they were and everything.
I
It is
think
like
that's the magic of Michael Kahn, the editor. Is
that's true.
Like one of the magic of this collaboration is this lifelong, relationship between him and his editor, and him, and he does it. He makes things look effortless, and sometimes that doesn't work towards like a Hook. It doesn't. It has that same effortless. It should look like a little harder. And with this, I don't know. There's just like there's so much grit and dust on screen. Yeah, Ben, it's a very dusty movie, Ben.
So dusty.
So dusty.
I think
and
Hook is exactly the movie to bring up, though. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
But there's a difficult balance of like, you also don't want this movie being too weighed down by it feeling like too much of a struggle. There is like a
No,
weird
yeah, no, you don't at all.
midpoint.
No.
Right. Hook, there's like no
Well,
tension.
Hook is just,
right.
I mean, I know people love Hook, and we're going to talk
get
about
to it.
Hook, and there's fans of that movie, a whole generation.
We
of
will
fans.
have a defender on
But
the episode.
It's a
Oh,
clunky
Did
movie.
you say it? Or?
We'll tell you off
I
mic.
can't. Don't tell you off mic.
Okay.
Yeah.
But like, it's a movie that sometimes really feels like it's plotting, and even though these sets are large and these actors are here to have fun or whatever.
But that's what I'm saying. You're like
straining a
you're like,
bit.
oh, this movie was like filmed on air conditioned sets. Everyone's trailers were
they're
close by.
big.
The catering must have been great, you know? Like you feel that lack of
Yeah.
Yeah, Glenn Close stopped by to be a
Right.
She sure did.
like I'm sure that movie had its own struggles in its making, but like Raiders, they're like, this is like a fucking like complicated like military operation
Yeah, I mean, I think
that
Spielberg
they're like willing into existence.
Spielberg has said with Hook, and again, we'll talk about like where he's like, I didn't have a lot of faith in the meat of the movie, and
Yeah.
I cover for it by being like, make the sets bigger, more
Right.
colors, more,
paint the
more,
trees.
like,
Yeah.
and that's how that movie feels to me. It's like, it's just kind of like trying to distract you from not much.
I
Anyway.
think you're right about Michael Kahn deserving a lot of credit. I also think like John Williams' score is so
Oh my
much
God.
lighter than you would think.
Yeah,
It is so much jauntier than you would think.
yeah,
There are obviously like so many different leitmotifs in Indiana Jones that are iconic beyond just the obvious bump, where you're like, it's wild that Indiana Jones has 10 perfect themes that alternate. And most of them feel like they're more, like they would be more placed in like a screwball comedy or like a classic Hollywood romance.
you know who it lost to?
In 1981, it lost
Breaking
to Reds.
Chariots of Fire.
Oh, well, of course.
Chariots of Fire. There you go.
And obviously John Williams had he had like 3 Oscars at that point. But you're like, how did it lose? Oh, Chariots of Fire. Well, it's pretty famous.
I'm sure it'll be brought up numerous times throughout this wave of your podcast, but the John Williams doc on Disney Plus does a really excellent job giving you an overview of what was something I grew up in. Going back to the world I grew up in, is John Williams delivering a banger, like it's a world-class, career-defining banger of a soundtrack about every 4 months.
Yes.
Just
I mean,
it is
on one.
Jaws, Close Encounters, all the Star Wars, and then Superman, and like and things in between. It's incredible. And then as expressed in the documentary, he may be one of the biggest pop stars of all time, and certainly of that era. Like there was who was a bigger musician? Who did you? I knew who he was at 11 years old. I knew his name, and I knew that if his name was attached to the movie, I was in good hands.
But also, like, Marion's theme is like the 5th most important theme in this film musically. Like, that's the quality of like his number 5. You know, it's not just like, oh, he came up with a perfect theme for Indiana Jones, the character, and then the rest of the score is just riffing and variations on that one thing.
It's just incredible.
It's insane.
And to the point where John Williams would then take me to other filmmakers. Like I literally feel like how I met Brian De Palma and other people was through John Williams works with him, then he must be equal to Spielberg. I will then go there.
Well, it's almost like it's like the famous Roger Ebert, like M. Emmett Walsh, Harry Dean Stanton rule, where you're like, no movie with those guys in it can be entirely bad because those guys are always going to do something interesting. You were like, there is no entirely bad movie with a John Williams score.
It's an interesting question.
Fury.
There are certainly there are movies I don't like that he did the score for.
Yeah, but no, you're arguing like, does his score make even the most bland
have
thing?
some value?
I mean,
and
probably,
you can argue 1941 is among his very, very best, like top tier. John Wayne. I've written whole graphic novels
just to the 1941
soundtrack. It's just an incredible soundtrack.
He did the score to Heartbeats.
Fun. Yeah,
I remember the Heartbeat score being good.
There you go.
Yeah,
with Andy Kaufman.
Yeah,
Andy Kaufman Heartbeats.
Yeah,
well, I never heard that.
For that. I mean,
Andy Kaufman Heartbeats, I feel like I brought up a lot on this podcast, but as like an Andy Kaufman weirdo comedy obsessed kid, I would see photos of that movie in magazines and shit as like, this was one of the first best makeup nominees. And I'm like, there's a Bernadette Peters, Andy Kaufman robot love story movie. How is this not my favorite movie of all time? It felt very hard to see for a very long time. They finally put it out on DVD at some point in the mid 2000s. And I was like, I get to see Heartbeat, which is about to become my number 1 favorite movie in history. And it just so definitively doesn't work in a way that is astounding.
That was another one of those movies that played for a window on Showtime all the time. In the earliest days of cable, when there was only like 6 movies and they just played constantly, like the movie Scavenger Hunt would play like constantly, right? So yeah, so I did see that. And as a fellow comedy nerd of an age, I was, oh please, of course, it's just you guys don't understand it. It's brilliant, and you people don't understand it. And you watch it for 4 minutes, you go, oh no, okay, that's all right.
Yeah,
That's enough of that.
Catskills is the least funny character in the history of movies, the cigar-smoking robot.
I hate to cut you off, but we must finish our discussion.
You don't want to hear
of
me
Reeves and
rant about
Ostrom.
Catskills for the 5th time in the arc of our podcast?
That's exactly right. I do not. Simply because we have
As much as
touched on
he
that
doesn't,
before.
I do, but I appreciate it. There's other episodes for that. Anyway.
Are there action sequences we have not gotten into enough of the many action sequences in this movie? I do think the car chase is the best constructed. The horse.
Truck chase?
Yeah.
And also opening weekend and the opening experiences. By the time we're at the car chase, you are truly a breathless audience member. You just cannot believe how much movie you're getting.
Uses
and how
every
much
part of the truck, go on top, go in the hood, right? Like, I like anything that, maximizes a small
Also,
space.
this is more movie than you thought was previously possible.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Like David and I talk about when we did the Raimi series and watched those Spider-Man movies, which were so pivotal for us because they come at a time parallel with your work and all of that. But you watch those and there was an expectation of superhero movies where for so long it was like, you can't make these. They're too expensive. The effects aren't there. And then it finally got to the threshold point. Computers can make Spider-Man swing through the air. But you'd watch these movies and be like, he's going to have like 2 fight scenes.
Right. That's
it is just not cost effective.
Right.
He will have like 1 fight scene in the middle.
I mean, God bless. That's what the first X-Men movie is.
Totally.
Where you're like, oh, they're out of action money.
Right.
Like, like there's 2 to 3 really fun. And I love.
And
I
like
have a very soft spot for that movie. But
yeah, but I do as well.
It's
But
light
like
on heavy
the final battle between the Green Goblin and Spider-Man at the end of the first Raimi movie is like 4 minutes.
Right.
I'm physically incapable of not saying out loud that I saw that movie for the first time sitting on a couch next to Stan Lee in Sam Raimi's office on an AV cart.
That fucking rolls.
They rolled in an AV cart, and I was not told what I was doing there. And then that's what I found out I was doing there. And I'm now supposed to watch the movie when Stan, who I don't know, is sitting right next to me.
You must be
having
early.
A lifetime of emotions about the special effects catching up to that which he's been trying to make this movie since he thought of it.
Because you must have only been in the Marvel fold for like a couple years at that point, right? Like,
I was early goings. I did not know I was there. Sam Raimi smartly figured out that he and I had the same job to reintroduce Spider-Man.
Right.
And was interested in the things that we did that were similar and the things that we did that were different, and had us come in as like the first test audience. And it was genuinely an incredible moment in my life, because I'm literally just a Sam Raimi fan, just the Evil Dead guys here, and then all of a sudden Stan walks in, hey, 2 believers, sits down, and we're watching the movie. It was good
Raimi impression, by the way.
Thank you.
Did he like it?
He was he got emotional at the end. There was like he wasn't bawling, but he was misty-eyed and took us down memory lane for a while. It was quite wonderful. And then they asked us, you'll like this. They asked us if we wanted to stay and help like work some of the dialogue situations out. And Dan grabbed his windbreaker and he goes, oh, well, I wrote 126 issues of Spider-Man. They're all yours. Goodbye. And he was gone. Bless. And I, as a younger creator, just stayed and immediately realized that he was smart and I should have ran out.
Right. And you're not just talking to execs all night.
Yeah, but what an experience.
Cool.
It was an incredible day. I'm sorry to
no,
it's a pretty good anecdote. Yeah. You're allowed.
The reason I brought all this up is that I imagine this is what it would have felt like to watch Raiders in the theater at the time. But seeing Spider-Man 2 opening night when the subway chase sequence goes on for like 15 minutes.
It keeps happening.
And I kept feeling like, this is impossible. How is this still going? The projector should be breaking down. I don't think the infrastructure exists to let Spider-Man exist doing Spider-Man shit for this long. And that's not even the final sequence of the movie, where it's like by the time you get to the truck chase and you're like, this is like the 5th, like absolute, like balls to the wall, like jam extended set piece that he has constructed now in this movie.
And also set it up with one of the greatest lines in history, which is, I don't know, I'm making it up as I go, which is such a ballsy line of dialogue for any action movie, let alone this. I don't know, just like you're like, oh, I don't know what's happening.
But it's a fucking mission
even
statement.
He doesn't know what's happening.
Right. It's a mission statement. It's the thing that so many of the imposters get wrong. And it's the same thing that works about John McClane in the first Die Hard, is It's fun to watch a hero who is capable, but doesn't totally have it figured out. That we need to watch them work it out. If someone is too in control of a situation, it gets pretty fucking boring. And you want to see the struggle, the pain, them doing the math in their head.
Yeah, he's smart. He's passionate. He can do it. He's not going to stop. How far will he go? This is where we are in the movie in our headset. Like, how far is this going to go? And then also, didn't you find out from the making of that it's mostly second unit, that Spielberg gave over that sequence, a very storyboarded sequence, to the second unit. And they talk about it in great length in the documentary. And so you're like watching a stunt team being given free reign. It's almost a Valentine to them. Like here's everything we know how to do, and we're going to have the blast doing it. And no one's telling us no because the director's not here. And you're getting all their best stuff.
George Lucas also did a lot of the second unit. Yeah.
He basically had to do that. Like, that was how to get the movie finished.
But it's also, I think it's a self-imposed. Spielberg's like, I'm not doing 1941 again.
Exactly.
I will not go over schedule. I will not get this reputation.
Right. The way to keep this movie on rails is to understand what needs to be delegated to other people.
Right.
Right.
So,
should we shout out at least the shirtless Chungus Nazi? I love that guy. He's so huge.
Again, you love his ideology.
No.
Can I
you
do
just like
David?
how large he is?
No.
This is not quite a merchandise spotlight, but here's the thing I want to say. Kenner gets the Star Wars license in 1977, right? And starts making all the figures. And some of them, they come up with these names like the Walrus Man, an elephant head and whatever. That later then Lucas is like, no, we need to give them canonical names. This is Momon Nidon. This is whoever, this Ponda Baba, right? But the whole like Lucas-y thing of like, we're gonna come up with a backstory and a name and a species and a planet for every fucking background character. Any object you see in any shot, even if it's never explained, there's an answer for it. I love that across now 4+ decades, the history of Indiana Jones merchandise, none of these characters are ever named.
He's named German Mechanic.
Correct. When those toys are sold in 1981, they are German Mechanic, Monkey Man, those are their names.
Got Cairo Swordsman.
Right,
yes.
exactly.
Wow.
And then like Lucasfilm loves to fucking backfill and be like, never mind, we finally landed on a name for that Star Wars character. Never does that with Indiana Jones. None of them are ever fucking named. Like, any character who isn't given a name on screen has no canon name.
Yeah. It is a looser world, which is fine. It's good. Right.
But also, you're like, who's that character? He's a German mechanic.
Big guy. Big man.
He's got a fucking Raleigh Fingers mustache.
He does. How do you know about Raleigh Fingers?
How do I know about Raleigh
It's also
Fingers?
like I just at my age, like when that guy punches Harrison Ford right in the fucking face, you're like, oh, he falls down. Like he's literally his knees go to jelly. And I don't think I'd ever seen that in a movie. I'm sure Burt Reynolds did it and stuff in the Smokey and the Bandit movies and stuff like that. But I had not seen it, and I was, oh my God, he might die.
Not comparing everything to modern day, but like the infamous fucking like Dwayne Johnson, Vin Diesel, contractual, how many punches they can take and how they can never lose a fight and whatever. You got two movie stars who both look like the German Mechanic and refuse to ever look uncool or weak for half a second. And Harrison Ford's like, no, this guy should fucking cold cock me. I have no ego about this. I beat him in the end.
Everything should be hard for me. Like,
right.
Things are hard.
And in the movie, the great scene where the quiet moment on the submarine where you get to see how beat the fuck up he is. Like, everything hurts.
I mean,
like that's still to this day not something you see in movies.
Really, from then to the end, he doesn't do much. Like, he's really out of commission and he's tied to a pole. Like, it's like, that's right. Once they're on the U-boat and stuff, it's really just a matter of Jones being like, I think Belloc wants to test the Ark, and that's sort of going to be the weakness here, right?
Yeah.
Rather than this going right.
But you're right. From that moment on, you have like the moment of intimacy that comes only when he's acknowledging his own wounds and scars. The year's not the mileage, right? This moment that feels like,
scene.
Right. And the fucking just when you think it's going to lead to like an ecstatic love scene, It leads to, like, he's getting knocked out,
Right.
you know? Like, he just is barely keeping his shit together.
I mean, and to be the end of Indiana Jones, where Jewish ghosts melt Nazis, is awesome.
Yeah.
But it's a passive ending for Indy in a way.
I was
And
gonna
so it's
say,
a bold choice.
Post the boat, basically everything he tries is kind of a non-starter.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, he's going to put on like a German soldier outfit. He's going to infiltrate them. This will
Right.
be an exciting last 30 minutes where he's amongst them. Almost immediately they catch
They're
him.
like, we busted you.
You're right up there with a fucking bazooka. What do you think you're doing? You look like Harrison Ford.
It's just surprising in a way that they, whatever, like, it just feels like a Hollywood studio now, I guess, would be like, well, come on. No, Indy has to, you know, use the ghosts against them or whatever. You know, like Indy has to be more involved in this.
Right,
And
but
it's their thing and they get to do what they want.
And
you
who
know?
is the Hollywood studio in this case?
That's what, no, but that's
George Lucas.
That's what I'm saying. Right.
Right.
Like, you know, they don't have
It's like
studio.
notes I think were less bad than they are now. But on top of that, you basically have this movie bankrolled by another artist.
Yeah. And so they get to have
it
this
also
ending.
like there's some shots in the doc about like Spielberg looking at like the models for the ghost, you know, the angel of death that's coming at the end, and they look very space alien, very Close Encounters-ish, like, and he's delighted. He's like, oh, this is perfect. I'm like, oh, I would not be able to see like what he sees. Like, it's kind of amazing that he does see what it actually is going to look like on screen, because you cannot tell with even perspective that that's what it's going to look like. The other thing I want you said that thing about the action heroes of the time. So when I was growing up, when Harrison Ford got into shape for Temple of Doom, it was international headlines about how buffed out Harrison Ford is. He is jacked to the gills. He got in shape. And then you see it today. He is just in very good,
normal
physical
man shape. Right.
Like,
he is
Justin Long in comedies is as buff as Harrison Ford is in Temple of Doom.
So this summer I had a good summer with the kids, like showing them like stuff they wanted to see that hadn't seen before, like Terminator 2 and The Martian, just like stuff that was they were too young for when they came out. Yes, The Martian. And looking at Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator 2, which is not him at his biggest, but him at his most iconic. And he is the exact same shape as Paul Rudd in Ant-Man.
Yeah. Yeah, basically. I mean, look,
the biggest man in the world at that time, the biggest man in the world, and that is mid-Marvel by today's standards.
Yes, I'm not throwing out the Justin Long thing wantonly.
No, I
remember.
I knew exactly what you're talking about.
But
I know exactly.
I had a very specific moment. I think probably around that time that He's Just Not That Into You came out, when I was like trying to kickstart my acting career in whatever way. And I was waiting at a stoplight to cross the street in New York, and I looked over and he was standing next to me. And the first thing I clocked was, wow, he's got like guns. And I was like, this isn't Justin Long trying to campaign for some superhero role. Like, our whole body image of people in movies has become so distorted that the guy who plays the skinny, gawky guy in comedies is actually cut in real life.
Yeah, like Chidi in The Good Place. But I remember like Harrison Ford working out made me go work out. Like, I was like
you can do it.
I should get some definition. Like, but I guess I also saw it as obtainable. Like he had worked out and he looked good, you know.
Yeah.
Also, we haven't mentioned Harrison Ford gets hurt a lot in movies in real life. Like, and watching all the documentaries in a row, he gets hurt on every single one. Almost every movie gets shut down.
He's always breaking limbs and crashing planes.
And up until including Force Awakens, he
like broke his arm or leg in the hydraulic
press. Like, okay, so
yeah.
the I'm just making it up as I go along thing, I think works because in some ways that is an admission of Spielberg talking about his own creative process, right?
Yeah.
That is the side of Indiana Jones that is Spielberg himself, who's looking around at the elements and gaming out what is the most fun way to construct this. How do I get out of this, right? Yeah, no, it's not even how the most fun way to construct it. It's what people talk about, where he gets to set and goes like, what is the fewest number of shots I can get this in? If this person walks from here to here on this line, then suddenly that's a oneer and we can cover half a page in like 5 minutes or whatever it is.
He's the most famous for it, and it gets talked about endlessly by film nerds, but you guys will reference it often. It is to watch him construct this, like when the doc cameras are on him, watching him in real time construct a scene, either from this or from Lincoln, with the same amount of he's so good at it. It's just an incredible. he really may be the best at that ever lived.
I think he is. And it's like you watch that footage and it's almost like he's like speaking in tongues, where it's like he's channeling something from like another dimension, where he's just like, oh, wait a second, duh, 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 duh. And he just like calls out 5 chess moves, and he's not doing it in a bossy or demanding way.
No.
It
Yeah.
feels like it's just coming to him suddenly. And then the thing comes together so quickly, and he just like knows exactly how to get it really fast. The other part of it's the Indiana Jones thing of talk about the fallibility of him as a hero, right? That he isn't worried about looking weak or failing or whatever it is. There's something unified there in the fact that Harrison Ford himself hurts himself a lot. And it's not just like, oh, he gets injured on set because he's not good at doing stunts. He gets into fucking planes and crashes them. And then people go, hey, Harrison, maybe time to stop flying planes. And he's like, fuck off. And then gets in another plane. Like there is something he's playing that speaks to something very real in him, which is this guy who just keeps fucking doing the shit. Even when he gets like knocked out, he just gets back up and walks off like the fucking crash site.
Yeah, but pre-Indiana Jones, you remember a scene where there was just a moment where the hero licked his wounds on camera? I can't even think of it. Yeah.
No, and like thinking about like comparable like 70s stars, you know, I know this is an 80s movie, but like, you know, who are the
it's 70s.
towering figures of like 70s action cinema, right? They're largely a lot older. Like you still have like, you know, Lee Marvin movies and like Charles Bronson movies and those things where those guys are a lot steelier and a lot more humorless. Burt Reynolds is way more humor. He does not want to show that he cares. He's never going to get his hands that messy, right? Like he's more the Han Solo type of wanting to be a little bit above it. And then you have like Dirty Harry, who is similarly just like, Dirty Harry's never going to show fucking vulnerability.
Yeah. I was like wonder, like when I was thinking back on this, like, how did I as a kid know that Burt Reynolds didn't give a shit? like
was it from him like going on the Tonight Show? I mean, truly, like, wasn't that
message to me just like he's not giving it
but
at
it's
all.
Like that was the product. Like that's what he was selling. It was like he was like the pet rock, and people were like, so what do I do? And they're like, you just put the rock on your desk and you pretend it's a pet, and you're like, I gotta do the work. He's just gonna sit there and flub his fucking lines.
Also, you were talking about the costuming. It's also how he's wearing the costume. The costumer talks in the documentary about how Harrison wears clothes, and he's not just wearing the jacket. He's kind of wearing the jacket like almost off his shoulders half the time, like it's barely on him. It's very unique. Like and when he like buttons up his tie and like puts the jacket, like there's a more like a more respectful Indiana Jones in the costume, but most of the time it's the jacket's almost not on his shoulders.
But that's like the craftsman side of it, which is like he's doing things that are unnatural, but he understands that he is in the business of making iconography. And the tough thing to do is to do that and not have it play as self-conscious. That he is able to give this very like natural behavioral performance with that kind of self-awareness.
Yeah, and again, you said before, the other thing with Spielberg is every single one of these supporting performers and or stunt people and or just presence on the screen just really feels right and exciting and surprising. Like it's just everywhere you turn, there's something really interesting to look at. There's someone who's bringing their whole story to this one line of dialogue that they're reading, even the Nazis. You know, also I know we're heading towards the end here with the Nazis, but it was very interesting to me when they were talking about making Crystal Skull, and he said, "No Nazis. I'm not like he literally the only rule Spielberg put out is I'm not going back to doing cartoon Nazis post Schindler's List."
Yes, he refused.
And that arc of just maturity as a storyteller. Like I have made a statement so powerful I can't go back to the Bugs Bunny Nazi. I can't do that. And him knowing he can't do that.
I find that very fascinating, but it also feels like an admission that he shouldn't have made another Indiana Jones movie. That's the problem. It is what is so interesting about him that, like, you know, I feel like it's been said that part of the calculation of making Temple of Doom a prequel was that he didn't want to just do the Nazis again. And if you were setting it right after, World War II isn't resolved. You don't want to go too far in the future. It felt like you could put it earlier and put it in a different timeline. And then Last Crusade, he's like, why am I trying to like fucking perfect something? He's never going to be better than Indiana Jones fighting the Nazis. But if you get to a point where you don't want to make Indiana Jones fight the Nazis anymore, then maybe it's like not the time to make an Indiana Jones movie.
But and also you get that great line in Last Crusade, the famous Nazis, I hate these guys. Like he's the only one that hates them. Like just this is something about me you should know. I don't like Nazis. It's a great line.
One of his defining characteristics.
And you had to wait a decade for it too, which is great.
All three face meltings.
So good. So different. I mean, obviously Tote is the best one.
Yes.
But they're all fun.
But it's like three of the best practical visual effects of all time, all happening right next to each other. And as you said, what's great about it is that they're three different bites at the apple, that they're different philosophical approaches.
The practical effects are good. I think also the individual freaks are, like Paul Freeman is the best. I mean, not Paul Freeman, sorry. Toad is the best. Ronald Lacey. The way he just goes like, like, he hits the scream the best. But just one is sort of shrinking, right? Like a sort of drying fruit. Tote, the Nazi guy. Tote melts.
Yeah.
And Belloc blows up.
Yeah.
Boom.
The behind the scenes of the Toad head, where like it was this incredibly like complicated, immaculately built layer by layer, basically like candle head.
It makes sense because that's exactly what it looks like. It looks like this thing is truly like being melted layer by layer.
Right. And they had like 40 fucking hair dryers on it. And then we're speeding it up even further. But you're like, it's a thing they could only do one time successfully.
Right.
And a lot of it is like theoretical, where they're like, we think this will work.
It worked. It's cool.
And it still works. I'm here in Portland where Raiders and Jaws plays on theaters at least once a summer. So I got to take the kids to, like, my son saw Jaws for the first time. Completely works even through modern eyes. And Raiders also works, and the head melting completely. Like I always wonder, like, does this read at all, or is this just something I grew up with? So I love it, right? It's decades old. Does this just look like an old like Three Stooges cartoon to my kids? You know what I mean? And it works. Completely rattled them. And to the point, like even watching it now, I remember thinking, did they find an actor that looks like this model they built? Because they like this. It's just so perfectly.
Right. That's part of what helps sell the illusion. You're right. Is that he himself looks like a model.
Right. That's why he looks like a little robot. Like I said, like a little alien. It's also just very satisfying in that sort of careful what you wish for way. It's Nazis getting what they deserve, but it's also just right. You're like, yeah, I know now. Maybe in the moment I would not know this, but the viewer has the kind of confidence of like, I wouldn't open that fucking box.
Ben,
you don't open the box.
If I open the box, I think God's hand would come out and pound me.
Be like,
Pound
what's
it
up, brother?
Like,
hey, keep it up, Eddie.
right.
And then just turn into a bunch of coins. And you're like, yeah,
You're
money.
saying he wouldn't beat your ass. He'd dap you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Good job.
But it does feel exactly like Inglourious Bastards, where like, oh, this is much farther along than I thought we were going with this storyline. Like we are well past what I thought was the line. So that's and also I don't know where this is going to end. Is God going to show up with the voice of Gene Hackman and give us the business? I don't know what's going to happen.
God, Gene Hackman never played God, did he?
Yes, he did. I just tipped my hat. It's a movie with the movie that isn't Grease, starring
Two
Olivia
of a
Newton-John.
kind. He is the voice of God in the John Travolta, Olivia Newton-John.
Wild.
Yes, Oliver Reed plays the devil.
Is that movie good?
Probably not.
No.
It was a notorious bomb.
Another one I saw in theaters. So chuffed from my experience watching Grease. Of course, this must be, even if it's half Grease.
Yeah.
It is a truly terrible movie.
It's a heartbeat.
Speaking to, by the way, I rewatched the Siskel and Ebert of this movie because also I'm of an age where everything Siskel and Ebert did affected me greatly. They were my film school for all of my childhood. And everyone they championed, I immediately took notice of. And so you watch this clip, and they are just giddy with excitement over this movie. They just can't believe they experienced this movie in a way that they rarely show on camera.
That's awesome.
And it really is. And Siskel says to Ebert, I was thinking, is this year movie such shit that I'm just loving every second of this? Like, because we haven't seen, he goes, honestly, Robert, we haven't seen a good movie in like 6 months, like a really good movie. He goes, is it that or is it just a really good movie? And they agree that it's a really good movie. And this was a terrible movie year for the cinema.
Like, it's kind of surprising that it got nominated not just for Best Picture, but Best Director when they had snubbed Spielberg for Jaws.
Yeah.
But it did just, like, this movie, I think, was just fucking undeniable.
Yeah, and it was obviously the biggest hit of the year. But you're right, of course, the Jaws had been as well. Now, but it's treated like these Spielberg movies pre-Schindler's List is treated, where it gets the noms,
right,
wins a bunch of tech awards,
yes,
and does not touch, like, there's no acting attention, and it loses to Chariots of Fire and Reds, respectively, for picture and director, which are, Reds is this, big egotistical passion project. I love that movie, but
I love that movie dearly. It is one of my favorite movies of all time. I covered it in great length on Scott Aukerman's Scott.
Oh, yes.
Oh, that's
yes.
right. Great episode of Scott Hasn't Seen.
Oh, thank you.
And then Chariots of Fire is the little movie that could that year. That's
right.
the movie it's the coda of its year. Everyone's like, I really loved that movie.
Those are serious movies about serious things coming out of the 70s where New Hollywood was like, we got to fucking engage with shit politically. And like Spielberg is making these like fun, like gumball rally movies.
Yeah, it's just not right. The Oscars have not caught up to what he's doing.
Yeah.
And
yet they couldn't ignore him. There's a weird balance of them being like, come here, but not too close.
Right.
Yeah.
To be clear, I love Reds.
It's a weird public narrative that goes on for the 80s, like when Spielberg getting his due. Like this is the narrative through every movie, including Color Purple, and all the way up to Schindler's List.
Let's play the box office game.
Okay. Any final things you want to say? I mean, the final moment, you sort of teed this up, but it's like, it is the one most satisfying resolution to what do they do with the relics that the sequels can't ever replicate, of just putting it in a crate and it's just like stacked up. And then this incredible shot of this warehouse and being like, every single fucking crate in this place
is an Ark of the Covenant.
Has some fucking thing in there that caused some crazy adventure, presumably.
Yeah, anyone with a little story brain just explodes. Like, every one of these is an adventure. Every one of these is a comic book I have to read.
Yes, but it's also kind of like, it's this weirdly like bittersweet note of like, and all that for what? It like gets stacked up.
And then you get the shot of Karen Allen in full wardrobe and makeup, like a woman about town, like which we had not seen because we've only met her. We met her at her lowest and watched her through an adventure. So here she is in full makeup, and you're like, "Holy shit!" like I don't know. It was like at the end of the movie, the last thing you think of, "Oh my god," is a fun thing to think of, and also thinking of it like if it was today, I wonder if Karen Allen would have more of like a Jennifer Lawrence career. You know what I mean? More of like, I know she had shots where she got to be the lead.
We talk about it on the Starman episode.
Right. I mean, I think we both said that we think she should have won the Oscar that year, and she wasn't even nominated. And it does feel bizarre for like either or. If it was just Animal House or Indiana Jones, you'd be like, either one of those should have set her up to have a dominant career for 15 years. The fact that she did both, it's just kind of bizarre that she didn't have a bad career, but it's like she should have been like one of the top 5 female stars in America for all of the 80s.
Everything.
Yeah. And yes, she was clearly capable of doing anything and everything, and still is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Film was the biggest film of the year.
It was successful.
Very successful. Made $220 million domestic, $20 million budget. Comes out June 12th, 1981. Brian was there.
I was there.
Opens number 1 at the box office. We're in this stage where we,
wide release.
We're beginning to have opening weekends.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2 is another.
What did it open to? Did you say
$4 million?
Robust.
Yeah,
but also interesting. Reading this morning was not tracking well prior to release. They were worried about it. There was a Superman 2 was out tracking it by a mile.
Interesting.
So that is, I know.
Superman 2 is one of the big hits of the year, but not as big.
But as a child, I was all in on Raiders. Like we couldn't wait. So that's weird to hear that.
It is opening against another new movie that is a big adventure movie, epic fantasy movie, that is not as well remembered.
In 1981, it's a big epic. It's not Excalibur, is it?
No. Even more ancient than that.
In terms of when it's set?
Yes.
Is it biblical?
No. A little forward, maybe.
A little?
I don't know. No, it's no. Ancient myth.
Ancient myth.
Yes. It's a film
Clash of the Titans?
There you go.
Oh.
With Harry Hamlin and Laurence Olivier and, Release the Kraken mode. Obviously later remade with Sam Worthington.
Yes.
The last work of
Who
Ray
I guess
Harryhausen.
really is kind of our generation's Harry Hamlin. Yes, no. I mean, that's the big thing is it was
the end of the Harryhausen.
Right. And look, it's a throwback. We're letting Harryhausen do one last. Yeah.
Here's another new movie that week.
Okay.
A comedy. One that we also epic. One that we will, I'm sure, cover on this show one day.
We will cover this someday.
We'll cover this directly.
One epic comedy. Is it a genre mashup? It's a comedy.
Like biblical
something?
epic?
He's struggling to
It's a
think how he would describe
epic
this.
movie.
Is it History of the World
Holy
Part 1?
Moses? Oh, okay.
History of the World Part 1 from Mel Brooks.
I was going to pull out a Holy Moses, which is pretty.
That would have been good.
Yeah.
Okay.
But not a film I've maybe only seen once. Not a Mel Brooks I really know very well.
It's not one of my favorites, but it is
got good stuff.
Consistently funny. It's got great stuff in it. Yeah.
But so all three of those movies are opening against each other.
That's wild.
Very weird that Raiders and Clash of the Titans, like those feel like way too much overlap there, but they were. Now, number 4 at the box office. Ben, you might be interested by this movie. It's
called Bone Dirt River.
It is the third of, I don't know, 6 or 7 films that this comedy duo made that you might be interested by.
Is it a Pryor and Wilder?
No.
I know you were pitching this to Ben. Okay. Oh, I think I know who it is. I don't want to guess.
These guys like to, take it easy.
Oh, you're talking about Cheech and Chong.
That's right.
My boys.
Now, what is the third Cheech and Chong movie?
Big proponents of the jazz cigarettes, those two.
Yeah. Is it the weird one where it's like the brothers?
Corsican Brothers, I think, is the last
That is
one.
their
right?
sixth, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Way off.
Okay. The second one is Cheech and Chong's next movie. Is that correct?
That is the second one. The first one is Up in Smoke, obviously.
Is this
first one's Up in Smoke. Okay.
Is this Sweet Dreams?
It's called Nice Dreams.
Okay.
In which they sell drugs out of an ice cream truck, and Stacy Keach is a DEA guy who's trying to catch him.
Should we do the Cheech and Chong movie?
We've mentioned it. We've had him on Patreon brackets.
I gotta say this. I don't know if I've seen all 6, but I've definitely have seen a lot of them, and I don't remember anything about them.
That's weird because you must have been dead sober while watching.
Would you include Yellowbeard and After Hours?
No, I feel like because we'd want to save that for a Martin Scorsese and Mel Damsky series. Any credit for pulling Mel Damsky, director of Yellowbeard?
No, I think it's
no lookup.
It's Up in Smoke. Next movie, Nice Dreams. Things Are Tough All Over. Still Smoking. And Corsican Brothers is sort of their last live action film together.
In how many years?
They did them very close together. Like Up in Smoke is 78 and Corsican Brothers is 84. Like they did them all back to back to back to back to back, and then they stopped.
Was there a later, more recent movie where they teamed up again, animated?
Yes,
Am I
it went straight to DVD.
It was straight to DVD?
Oh, no, it wasn't actually. It did have a limited theatrical release, the Cheech and Chong's animated movie, !
But I was also thinking, because I know they've both done animated roles, I was like, was there a thing where they cast them like Brother Bear style to play animals?
Well, Chong is in Zootopia.
That's what I'm saying. And Cheech is in Lion King.
Right. They're all in, they're reliable.
He's, of course, Ramon in Cars.
Right.
Of course.
I'm sure there's a Nash Bridges special episode.
Yeah.
Number 5 is a romantic comedy, directed by and starring written, directed by and starring this man.
Is it an Alan Alda?
It's an Alan Alda.
I got that right?
You did.
Okay. Is it the one with Carol Burnett?
It's the one with Carol Burnett and Len Cariou, Rita Moreno, Sandy Dennis.
Do you know this title, Brian?
I know it's not Sweet Liberty. Sweet Liberty is young Michelle Pfeiffer.
Sweet Liberty is his second film.
Okay. And there's the Joe Tynan one is a different one, right? There's the one where he plays the politician. Is that what it's called?
I don't fucking
Yeah,
know.
The Seduction of Joe Tynan.
Thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
this one is called. This isn't the Four Seasons, is it?
It's The Four Seasons, his debut.
Which is now being remade with Tina Fey and John Hamm, maybe?
Really?
That's not a Neil Simon? That feels like a Neil
It
Simon.
feels like a Neil Simon California Suite type thing.
That's it. Yeah,
And it
California.
has a 4-part structure, season by season. But it is not. It is Alan Alda, written and directed by him. Never seen it.
I never have either. I'm trying to find this. There was an announced fucking Tina Fey 4 Seasons.
Yeah, you're right. There is
Yeah.
some kind of Netflix show, I think.
Yes.
Like
But I'm trying to remember who the other person is.
It can't be John Hamm. He's in every TV show now. Like it can't.
it might have been Carell.
Steve
'cause-
Carell.
Yeah.
It's a date
I can
night
see that.
re-team.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
And
And Coleman Domingo.
Sure. Also in the top 10, you've got and I wonder if you saw any of these movies. Brian, you got Bustin' Loose, the Richard Pryor film.
That was on cable constantly,
Mhm.
all the time.
Never seen that one. Cicely Tyson is in it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It looks like he's busting loose, I guess. You've got the Sean Connery movie Outland, which is a Peter Hyams film. I
Right.
enjoy Peter
That's
Hyams.
like him with a shotgun.
But it's like set on Jupiter.
Right.
It's like a space western. I've
Yes.
never seen it, but it seems very cool. And my guess is it's not as
It
cool as
is.
I want it to be because it's not that famous, but you're saying it's pretty cool.
It is not that cool. There is
Shit.
believe it or not, there is a graphic novel adaptation by Steranko.
Wow.
Well, full circle on this puppy, but and it's one of his great mid-career moments as a comic creator. And the comic book is so well done and so innovative and Steranko kind of thing that you go see the movie thinking you're seeing something similar, and it's just not there. It's very, like there's certain sci-fi movies of that era that just all vibe like Black Hole. They're just depressing and dark and weird and not Star Wars. It's that. It's not Alien. It's not as bad as Black Hole, but it's trying to be Alien, and it's just not connecting.
The tagline is, "On Jupiter's moon, he's the only law." That sounds like the best movie of all time.
Exactly. It's
Put it in
definitely-
the heartbeeps canon.
It's set on Io, the volcanic moon, not
A Debris?
Europa.
Oh, okay.
You've also got an action film called Kill and Kill Again.
Good title.
Yep, don't know much about that one. You've got something called The Legend of the Lone Ranger.
Yeah, that was a big movie. That was
Lone
one of
Ranger
those
movie.
very marketed movies. It was marketed with Star Wars energy, and
Right. With a young Michael Horse as Tonto, Michael Horse from Twin Peaks. And then you've got the Gary Coleman comedy On the Right Track. I can kind of see what Siskel and Ebert were talking about of like, do movies just suck right now, or does this rock?
Yeah.
Because History of the World Part 1 is good, I guess.
Yeah.
Pretty much every other movie I described seems mixed to bad.
Yeah, I also feel like History of the World was a hit, but not on the level of his previous movies. I think it was seen as a little bit of a like,
Sometimes we
is
do
Mel
these,
repeating himself?
we do
Yeah.
these old box office games, and there's sort of like 7 masterpieces in the multiplex. Instead, you've got On the Right Track, which was the
And by the way, we'll like get to that. Like fucking E.T. Summer is notorious for like wall-to-wall bangers, Like a lot of the other Spielberg movies, these box office games are coming out in like peak blockbuster years. 81 feels a little thin.
Gary Coleman plays an orphan who lives in a locker at Union Station in Chicago. And then he like wins the lottery or something.
Okay. There's the Gary Coleman cartoon
It sounds like something
show.
that was written like on some snot that a guy sneezed. Like he
Yes.
didn't even have a tissue. He was
Do you-
just like, "Pah."
Do you remember the Gary Coleman cartoon show, Brian? Where he was like an angel?
Yes.
Yeah. And it was called the Gary Coleman Show, which was confusing because I'm like, it's supposed to be Gary?
Again, kids, this is a time where there was things on TV, and either you watched them or there was nothing else to
Or
watch.
you stared at the wall.
This is your choice.
Right.
You have a choice. Go read or watch this. And there's no Disney on demand or every Star Wars or every Marvel movie available at every second of the day.
I'm sure you got a stick in a hoop you could chase.
This is I will say, David, a perfect example of what you referred to as not really movies. Like the movies that don't really exist, except they do. They were in theaters.
Yeah.
On the right track.
Yeah, on the right track.
Yeah. Well, it was a financial success. I mean, $13 million.
Wow.
I think, back then it was like
double the opening of Raiders.
Yeah, nice work if you can get it.
Yeah.
So it does looking at that box office, it is interesting. It does feel like 1981 was a bit of an odd year after years of Star Wars, Superman,
Godfather,
right? Right. These
Poseidon Adventure. Yeah.
Oh my God, where it's like the big hits of 1981 are like
Rocky,
Raiders, Superman 2, Arthur, Stripes. Like it's like movies that do have some legacy, but it's not blockbustery in the same way. It's a bit of an odd moment before the 80s really ramp up and we start getting like a lot of sequels and big action movies and Arnie and Sly and all that stuff.
Some of these movies, their tale is fully on home video and
television,
cable.
right.
Like Stripes played constantly when I was a kid, to the point where all of my friends knew it by heart, like every line.
Except no one's ever seen the second half of Stripes. My favorite thing.
No one's ever seen it.
No one's ever seen it. It's the most watched first half in history.
Too long. That movie is actually too long too. That movie should be 82 minutes long. It's like 110 minutes long.
Oh, you watched the shorter cut.
We got to be done, Griff. We've been talking for so long. I'm not complaining.
Yeah, I'm just looking. I'm checking my notes here. It's an episode on Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yes, well, this is a problem we have on these Spielberg episodes.
Yes.
They're all
There's a lot
pretty
to talk
famous.
about. Yeah.
There's a lot to talk about.
What's interesting? Harrison Ford got like $6 million for this. I just saw this. $5 million each for the two sequels, and then $65 million for Crystal Skull.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, I believe his deal for Crystal Skull was 20% of first dollar
the money
gross,
right,
not profit. Right. Like that was the deal elevated by Crystal Skull that Lucas, Spielberg, and Ford were like, it's 20% to each of us right off the top.
Probably partly why it took so long to make it.
Do you think this movie is Harrison Ford's best performance?
Oh, boy. Oh, come on now.
I think it's his most important performance, and I think it's the greatest distillation of what he is uniquely great at as a movie star, if that makes sense. Han Solo will always be my favorite Harrison Ford character. It's just the one, and probably a lot of it was I saw it at the right age.
But single performance, maybe. Yeah. I mean, I think that might be
what that reaction you had was what was that reaction?
You're weighing Witness in your mind, I feel
I
like.
love
very specific.
Witness so much. But I think it would be a little, anorak of me to be like, you think it's Witness.
Yeah. Morning Glory, obviously. I contend he should have gotten an Oscar nomination for Frittata.
He's also very good in Presumed Innocent.
I love him in all of those sweaty late 80s, early 90s thrillers that he made. And Witness sort of the start of that. And I love him in Air Force One, and I love him in, many, many things. But I think Indy is probably a good argument.
You're posing a good question because it is an interesting case of a lot of stars like him. You'd be like, well, there's the most iconic performance, what will clearly be the first line in their obituary. They're never going to surpass that. And yet, actually, their best performance is X, Y, or Z, right? You're like, well, that's their most famous performance, but their best actual work as an actor was this other thing. This might be one of the rare cases where they're the same answer.
They're the same thing, yeah.
Yeah.
I think given the kind of star he is.
The greatest thing he ever put on film was on Jimmy Kimmel Live, the sketch where he confronts Chewbacca for sleeping with his wife.
Yes.
It is an incredible comic performance, which he does not break. And every line he delivers is near perfection. And if you think I'm joking, Google it later. It is an incredible live performance where he just kills.
That sketch was written by Jeff Loveness, who later wrote Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania.
Oh, no shit. I didn't even know that. That's fantastic.
He had done like viral videos, get hired onto Kimmel. That was the first thing he wrote. We had him on the George Lucas talk show talking about this. That was
cool.
Him on Kimmel, I think the Monday or Tuesday after Cowboys and Aliens had came out. And he, during the interview, cannot stop smarting from the fact that the Smurfs beat them at the box office. Like, it was the mistake of him not going on to promote the movie in advance. They booked it as a victory lap, assuming the movie would be a blockbuster. And then he's just like, yeah, but I guess we're not as good as the Smurfs. But the show opens with that Chewbacca sketch, which is incredible and lives in my mind forever because he's yelling at Chewbacca and he goes, "I don't need you anymore. I'm in a movie with Daniel Craig now." And he says Craig. And I
That's
think
how you say
about
his
it
name.
all the time. Is it?
Yes.
Was he right?
He's right. Americans
Yeah.
say it wrong.
I'm in movies with Daniel
We say
Craig.
Craig, but it's not Craig. It's Craig.
Craig.
We will link to that clip in the episode description.
Chewbacca.
And I think we should also wrap up the episode.
It's time to be done.
Brian, anything you want to plug?
Oh, yeah. Listen, head over to jinxworld.com where you can sign up for my newsletter and all my books that are available at darkhorse.com, including Powers and the brand new released masterpiece. And for fans of this podcast, I have a graphic novel coming out in January called Fortune and Glory, the Musical, which tells the very true story about how I was the writer of the Spider-Man Broadway musical, Turn Off the Dark, for a week and a half. I think people will enjoy that true Hollywood disaster story. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, I cannot wait to read that. Are you kidding me? Brian, please come to New York sometime so I can pick your brain about all kinds of things.
8
I have
million
so many
questions.
nerdy questions for you about the early 2000s in Marvel, especially. But
Yeah, the
so
fucking
many other
Thunderbolt Ross mustache conversation.
That
That was
was
the tip of
nothing.
the iceberg.
That was
Yeah.
nothing. I have lots to ask you.
That's
but,
the coolest question David had.
All right. Well, Ben, I know you want to go, but I just want to take a minute and say that I really do love you guys in this podcast a great deal. It is not to be weird. I do think you guys are the spiritual successors of Siskel and Ebert in the best way possible. I just think it's elevated conversation that makes everyone I talk to about it think better about their work and make smarter choices. So I just really wanted to say thanks.
Ben is sitting behind the
Ben's
monitor,
going like, wow.
victory lapping. Well, no, because he, of course, wanted us to call the podcast Griffle and Simsberg. And he's gesturing like, what was I telling you guys?
He was right.
I was right all along.
He was right all along.
And every time you give Ben a nickname, I consider it for myself as well. Like Dirtbike Bendis just sounds
Oh,
like something I
fuck.
could have pulled off in my younger days. So I do appreciate you guys test marketing these Ben-related nicknames.
Hey, happy to do it. Thank you so much for being here. It truly is an honor. As the show's gone on for years, every once in a while we hear about someone who's a listener and it flips us out. And we're like, that fucking person listens to us make fart jokes. But you are one that is truly humbling because of how large you loom in our development of how we understood stories for both of us personally, and much the way you talk about the Lucas and Spielberg stuff that you grew up with.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening.
Yes. Join us next week for, should I double check?
I believe it's a movie called E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
Just making sure that nothing. Yep. E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
So I'm just going to check my notes here.
We'll do our blankies the next week. I think.
Banger.
Yeah, another good one.
Yeah, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Fairly large.
Yeah, he made it
film.
1 year later.
Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing. And by the way, and after E.T., that's it. He never goes back to. There's no doubt of Spielberg's.
No, I mean,
when
he makes 3 movies that don't go over as much, but it doesn't matter. Yeah,
He's unquestionably minted from the
So he
moment
can't
of
be stopped,
Raiders
right.
on. They're like, we can't. It's not a fluke.
How far does this Spielberg run with you go?
Up to Schindler.
Oh, okay. That's farther than I thought. Oh, yeah. Cool. Great.
It gets to him winning his Oscar. And then we'll win our Oscar for Best Podcast, a category I assume they're including in next year's ceremony, along with most cheer-worthy moment.
Yeah, most dollars for CEOs collected.
Coming up in a few days over on the Patreon, we're doing a Spielberg bonus covering Something Evil and Savage.
Oh, yeah.
right.
His 2 major TV movies in
Check
between
those
Duel and Sugarland Express. And as always, Bendis, you got me thinking, drafting already in my head. Ben's nickname for this has to be Bendiana Bones, right?
Yeah. There you go.
Yes.